we're going to go through kind of all the little things to keep an eye on the 2020 while you're in the field this spring, to be able to maximize the investment in that system and be able to minimize any issues that come up in the field and be able to keep you guys running as best as possible. We've got Troy McCone down from Aberdeen, South Dakota, and then Stacy Lewis down from Colorado to assist us today. So, Troy.
Morning, guys. Morning. How long till we go to the field? Weeks?
Right now, if you want to.
Yeah? Well, I have 22 inches of snow in my front yard, so we can hang out down here as long as I want, I guess. But we got some serious flooding and whatnot, so it's nice to see some ground. It's nice to see some grass. Haven't seen any of that in months, so appreciate you having me down here. So my 11th season going to the field in precision agriculture. Hans, you've been around for how long?
Since 11.
Okay, so you're just about as long. Stacy's been around since 12 or 13? Somewhere in there?
Somewhere in there.
Okay, so the problem with all of that is we do this every day, all day, and you guys don't, so we tend to go way too fast. We will do our best to keep our hands at bay and slow down and walk you guys through this. However, the one rule that I will ask is that if you don't understand something that we're covering, that you raise your hand and you ask, you speak up, throw something at us, whatever you want to do. Obviously, planting is a very important part of your operations, and we want to make sure you completely understand what we're doing on the screen, why we're doing it, what it's telling you. But we will probably tend to go too fast. We may assume some things, we'll try not to, but if it doesn't make sense to you, it's probably not making sense to the rest of the room, so just ask the questions as we go. Let's make this more of a conversation than a presentation. We have a handout for you to take home to kind of review some of the real important metrics that are there, but we want to familiarize everybody with the screen, how things operate, how you can change layouts, just basic operations, knowing that, you know, for some of you, it's probably been 11 months since you've touched one, right? So, pretty basic setup on these. We operate like a stoplight. So green is good, yellow's caution, red is get your butt out of the tractor and figure out what's going on. Okay. You will see yellows come and go from time to time. Green, obviously, everything is going really well. Change, before we get going here, go to setup, go to systems, display. Change, why are we jumping on?
No action.
Yeah. Is it on the liquid alert that it's jumping? That was going to a liquid screen. Go to setup, go into your liquid. So what we're going to do is Stacy's doing all the button pressing on the computer. We just get this so it's not jumping to go to advanced. All right, fine. We'll just deal with it. Okay, go to home. So what I'll do is I'll touch on the screen. You guys can follow my hand around rather than trying to keep up with her mouse cursor that's running around. The new Gen 3 that came out, I guess, what was it, last year that we started using this in the field full time, has a lot more customization to it. You can run it however you want. A lot of drag and drop features, kind of some hidden functions that are in there. We'll try to cover those as best as possible. But before we go too terribly deep into this, we really want to go through these big boxes down on the sides and help you understand definitions of them. We'll try to stay away from in-sign language and acronyms and things like that. We'll try to spell all that out just so nobody gets confused in those. But there's some pretty big metrics, and I think you'll see these on those laminated pages. Feel free to throw those in the cab with you while we're planting. That'll give you kind of some idea on those targets of where we want to go, and then you've got notepads if you want to take some other notes. So we'll start in the upper left-hand corner with population. That one's pretty self-explanatory. I think everybody in the room understands that, but that's our plant density that we're looking for. Your large, bold number that's in the top is the planter average. Okay, we're looking at that over the last 300 seeds approximately to give us an idea of where our average population is at. Then down below that, as soon as we turn the corner and get planting here again, you're going to see three other numbers. You're going to see a bar graph in here. Each of those triangles that are on there are going to represent each individual row of the planter. So ideally, in a perfect world, they'd all be the right-hand side. They'd all be grouped really tight together. You may see some of them start to fall down a little bit lower, a little bit higher than intended. Your lowest row is going to show up below there, and your highest row is going to show to the right. Okay, so ideally we want those as tight as possible. Pretty self-explanatory in that category. Stacy, if you go ahead and click on the 35.9. Anytime on any of these big boxes like that you touch the bold number, it's going to take you to the level 2 screen. Okay? Level 2 is going to give me a bar graph row by row so that I can see the distribution across that planner rather than one total number. If I click on a given row, if there's one giving me an issue, if I click on that row, it should go to a third level page. And that third level is going to give me all the information of all the sensors on one single row for us. So as I'm looking at population, it's also going to give singulation and our downforce measurements. If I had a vac sensor on that row, that would show up as well. Down below that, you're going to see some patterns of essentially the seed back behind that planter. If I were to stop and get out and walk back 12 feet, you'd be able to see where those seeds are supposed to be. Okay, so again, in a theoretical perfect world, all of those would be equal spaced. All of those would be green. If you see an X go by, that means we have a skip. If you see a blue go by, that means we have thrown a double out. So let's play a for instance here. If I have this line going through and you see an X go by, and then we see an X go by, and then we see an X go by, and it starts to follow a pattern, what's going on? We got a seed plug, right? Okay, so that's pretty easy to go back and figure out. But this is a quick, easy way. If you don't like looking at the maps, this is a pretty quick and easy way to start seeing patterns develop in a given row, a given section of a planter, whatever that may be. If at any point on any screen, anywhere in the monitor, you ever get lost, all you have to do is hit home down in the corner, and that'll take you right back to your main page. Okay? We try not to do any icons. We try not to do any hieroglyphics or anything else that you have to mess with. We try to use words as much as possible to make sure that you guys understand where we're going. So Stace, go ahead and hit home for me down here in the corner. So that's kind of the synopsis here on population. I think everybody in the room understands that. Any questions on population? Everybody good there? Okay. We got to build on a good foundation, because if we skip the easy stuff, then we get to the more complicated and we're missing some key elements. So Hans, anything to add on population? All right, next thing. So first thing I want to dial in, me personally, this is Troy's opinion, I want to know my population. Okay, I've made a plan over the winter. I'm going to plant X hybrid at X population. I'm going to plant Y at a Y, whatever that may be. That's a pretty easy one to dial in. That's either a ground drive transmission, that's a hydraulic motor, electric drive, whatever it is. I'm going to dial that in pretty quickly. A lot of times I can do this sitting in the yard with the auto load switches, just running the meters. Next thing I need to know is singulation. Okay, I've asked for one single seed to drop unless I'm in a hill drop cotton situation or something like that, but I'm looking for one single seed every single time I have a cell go by. Okay, we're going to call that singulation. If you look that up in the dictionary, it doesn't exist, so we made that word up apparently. I don't quite understand how we did that. But our goal is 100%. Very rarely will you ever see it sit at 100%. Okay? The closer we get to 100, the better we are agronomically in the field. But there should be absolutely no reason on any planter in this room that you would fall below 99% on a field average. Your expectations is my entire farm should be better than 99%. Okay? And
for those of us in the room, we actually should be holding at 99.7 or better with the meters that you guys are all running. If we're dropping below that, we're either planting Pioneer 1197 or we got something else going on.
We have Pioneer jokes down here too. Wow.
No, it's 1197 is the only one. But
okay.
We got some of the guys, we've thrown those on. It's running at sub 90 down into 96 percentile and whatnot. So that's the one exception.
Man, I thought Pioneer jokes were only in Nebraska, but apparently that's down here too.
What's the reason for it?
So it's a medium flat seed. Half of them are pointed on where it went into the cob and the other half are stubby. And with that difference in geometry on there, if they would sort those two apart, I could run them both at 100%. But with those particular two combinations mixed in there, even with the best meter in the world, we're running 98.9 to 99.0 is the best we've been. Last year we found one lot of 1197 that ran 99.9. The rest of them are all running below that. And Scott, I'm sure you guys could speak to, you've been fighting this for how many years? 3? Yeah, it yields great, but yeah, it's a bear to plant. Yeah.
Is seed size going to make a big difference?
We'll get into dialing that in a moment, or do we want to talk about?
Short answer is yes, it absolutely matters. Okay. The nice thing is, in our setup on our meters, is you can make the adjustment in the cab. You don't have to get out. Okay. On some of the other meters, if we're running a case air delivery meter, if we're running a John Deere ProMax 40, if I'm running a Monosem, if I'm running these others, I can still get performance, but I have to do a lot more tweaking outside the cab to make it work. Okay. So the one thing to hear in here, and I don't know what everybody runs for equipment, and we're not going to go through that, but understand that this is not the only way to plant corn, right? Or cotton or soybeans or sunflowers, whatever we're looking at, okay? We have tools that'll help you. Don't hear me say that everybody's meter is junk or anything like that, right? There's plenty of different ways to do it. If you have specific questions on specific equipment that you guys have, feel free to just speak up. We'll be happy to answer them across the board. But our goal is going to be is keeping that as close as we possibly can to 100, realizing that it is attainable to be in the upper 99s. Okay? So we have to do a little bit of math. Everybody's got a notepad in front of them. Let's just run some hypothetical math because I'm from out of town and I don't know your numbers, okay? Pretty simple. Everybody's got a phone in their pocket. They've got a calculator with them. So let's run. What is your intended population for the year? Write that down on your piece of paper. Okay, in my part of the world, that's going to be roughly 32,000, depending on where I'm standing. It could go all the way down to 15,000. Now I want to know how big a round is a cob of corn. Is it 18s down here, 16s, 20s, 22s? What are we running for an average down here? About 16 around? Okay, so write that down. And how long is that ear of corn? Are they 30? Are they 35s, 42s? What are we looking at? Okay, so let's write 38 down, for example. Do we have big kernels, small kernels, really small kernels? What do we have, typically? Whatever normal is. There's no such thing as normal in agriculture, but... Okay, so let's go 85,000. Okay, those are the four numbers that make up yield. There is no science in yield whatsoever. Everybody agree on that? Nobody agrees on that, right? Yield is a math equation. Okay, there's tons of science in the math equation, but there is no science in yield, right? Yield is a math equation. So those four numbers that you wrote down determine your yield. In order for yield to go up, one of those numbers or more than one of those numbers have to change, okay? So it's going to be your population times girth, which would be the 16, times our length, which is 38, and divide that by your kernel count of the 85,000. What do we get for yield? Okay? So as we start thinking through singulation, or if we look at downforce, we'll talk about that later, furrow moisture, some of these other things. As I lose one of those harvestable ears, rerun your math and take the 20 or whatever you guys wrote down, 28,000 or whatever it was for your population, change that to 27,000, multiply that back out. What do we lose for yield? So if I go from harvestable ears of 28,000 per acre down to 27,000 per acre, what do I end up losing on average?
193.
It's about 7 bushel, right? Doesn't matter if I'm planting 15,000, if I'm planting 40,000. Every time I lose a harvestable ear per 1,000 acres, or per 1,000 per acre, I'm going to lose approximately 7 bushel an acre. Okay? If I want my yield to go up, I either have to have them bigger around, I have to have them longer, I have to have more of them, or I have to have bigger kernels. It's the only possible way for yield to go up. Okay?
Your kernel size was 85, the weight of your kernel is what?
So the 85,000 is how many kernels are in a bushel. Okay? Some guys will do that in the weight of a kernel by grams. I don't know that number off the top of my head, so we cheat and use 85,000. Okay? That could be late season nitrogen, that could be emergence, that could be a number of different things impact all four of these numbers, but in order for that yield to go up, so you're going to hear us argue, I'll use the word argue lightly, about the difference in 99 versus 99.5, or 98.5 versus 99.5, right? So if we start looking and penciling out the math on your farm, the difference in population in singulation by missing it by 0.5% absolutely impacts the bottom line of the farm. So some guys are going to be content at 98.5 going, that was a high A in high school, And Hans and I and Stacy are going to go, that's a mess. We've got to fix that, right? And you're going, it's 98%. What are we arguing over, right? Start taking 1% off of these numbers and it matters. And so that's where we're probably a little more in the freak category of we're going to look at details really, really tight. But that's why our expectation is to keep that above 99.0, 99.5, depending on where you're at and what crop we're running, okay? When singulation falls down, it's going to fall down one of two ways, okay? It's either going to fall down because we're skipping, or it's going to fall down because we're doubling, right? It's the only way we can go. I mean, theoretically, I guess we could have a triple, but if my skips are going down, what do? What's happening in the meter that's causing skips? Okay, so we could have a hole that's not accepting a seed and releasing a seed, so that's a skip. If I have not enough vacuum, what happens to the seed off the disc? Falls off, right? Falls before I get to the vac release. If I have a double eliminator like a singulator in ours in the VSET or the ESET meter, or I've got a double eliminator on the John Deere ProMax 40, or I've got the Case IH setup in there, I have something physically touching seed that's trying to knock doubles off. If that's too aggressive when the vac is too low, it's going to knock seed off the disc, and those all create skips, right? When skips go down, first thing I can do is increase vac, right? If I increase vac and nothing changes, then we've got to start addressing in different areas. They could be vacuum leaks at the row. There could be a number of other things happening. If I have doubles, what's happening? Could be too much vacuum. Could be a cell plate, depending on what crop I'm planting. The cell could be too big, where I've got multiple, happens a lot in sunflowers in my part of the world. You've got multiple seeds stuck in the same hole, okay? So we may have to make a disc adjustment. The best way to get around that, if we have specialty crops and not knowing this area very well, is to get a lot of seed, a small Ziploc bag, bring it to Hans, throw it on the test stand, we'll figure out what size disc we need to run. For field corn, correct me if I'm wrong in this, one disc. Okay, whether I'm running 65 pounds per bag or I'm running 32 pounds per bag, I can cover that all in one disc. Okay, I don't have to monkey around with a disc for rounds and a different disc for flats or anything like that. Okay. So as singulation goes up and down, we're going to want to make sure we're looking at those adjustments. So on this screen right now, it's saying, hey, there's something wrong on row 11. If we watch long enough, you're going to see row 11 click on and off, right? So row 11 was a problem, now 16 is a problem for just a second, and it comes back. Okay? I'm probably, me as an operator in the cab being realistic, I'm going to watch 16 for a few minutes, and if it continues to do it, then I'll get out. The second it goes yellow, I'm not stopping. Okay? I might on the first day just to figure out, get my bearings on everything. But 16 stayed up there for quite a while, right? So let's start thinking through, let's use hypothetically on 16. Again, I can go in and I can click right here on this 99.8. And that's going to take me into my next page. And so I'm looking at the rows that have no bar graph are running perfect. Okay? All of these rows are running absolutely perfect. As these bar graphs are going up and down, it's showing you that that individual row compared to the rest of them either has a bunch of skips or a bunch of multiples. So if I want to click on row 20, again, I can watch down here on the bottom and look for my errors coming across. So our spacing's a mess right now. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. But I can start looking at those errors. So let's say you start seeing some skips come across, but it's only on one row. It's only on row 20. What's the fastest way to fix row 20? Time's money in the spring, right? No matter where we're at in the country, the windows are always tight, so I've got to keep rolling as much as possible. Rather than tearing the meter apart and really diving into it, how do I address where my issue is at on row 20? Switch the meters. Okay? In my mind, and maybe I'm just wired a little bit goofy, technical support and troubleshooting is fork in the road after fork in the road, right? I'm going to come to a point, row 20 has a problem. Either it's actually having a problem. One side of the fork is I have a mechanical problem. The other side of the fork is I have an electrical problem that's giving me false data, right? Those are the only two possibilities. Okay, so your answer of switching rows is let's go down this path first and either eliminate this path or reverse course and come back. So if I move row 20, where am I going to move it? Okay, back up one screen, Stace.
One of the ones that doesn't have anything on the bar graph.
Absolutely. Okay, so 20's got the error, 19 next to it is perfect. If I move 20 to 19 and the error stays in row 20, now where are we at? something at the row, right? Could be a seed tube, could be a sensor, it could be something interrupting the drop of the seed. There could be a lot of different things going on that row, right? What is it not? It's not the meter, right? So that's my fastest point of trying to diagnose where I'm at. I know we're not in the meter. It's not my V drive. It's not my hydraulic motor. You know, it's something physically contained in that row unit. Same thing on downforce. Okay, there's a lot of different things we can do that same type of troubleshooting tactic, but is to try to understand as quick as possible and keep your wheels turning as fast as possible. That's how I'm going to isolate those two. Now, if it moves to row 19, I know it's my meter. I can crack it open. I can look for a vac seal. I can look for a disc. I can look, you know, whatever it may be, right? Other thoughts on that, Hans?
Depends on what we're going to touch on next.
Okay. Just jump in when...
So the being all but one of the planters in here are V drive, you're moving your drive and eliminating that, and that's following it. Otherwise, stuff would be staying on the row as far as your drive system. Back to the kind of looking here at the two halves of the planter. If you're running a machine that has two vacuum systems, this allows you to be able to dial in each vac fan. Stacy, if you go back to the home screen here, we'll go in. That skips and multiples top right, for dialing in your vacuum, if you have more skips than multiples, turn it up for the machine. If you have more multiples than skips, you want to turn your vacuum back down until you hit an equilibrium between these two numbers. Once you've done that, then go ahead and tap on Singulation. Depending upon where your vac fans are falling, so on the, say a 24 row, you have your left and your right fan, 1 through 12 is going to be on the one fan. You're able to then fine tune that one. Don't necessarily watch the vac sensor reading, watch what's actually happening on the machine. We get into the 16 row stackers, you got your 2 outside wings versus your center 8. Those are on 2 different fans. Pay attention, it's going to be a little bit harder, but work through that process. Get on the machines with 3 fans, know where your brake is at, and systematically work through to get that vacuum dialed in.
What is the proper vacuum number to run? Repeat after me, it doesn't matter. It is an arbitrary number. It's going to change by every lot of seed. Everybody wants to know, where do I set my vac? Question.
Can you change the percentage in the multiples and skips to watch that graph in a different?
If needed, there will be somewhere in the settings we can manipulate that a hair, but normally you're not going to, unless we're on 1197, you shouldn't have to be going any wider than this on these meters that we have here.
Say that again on the skips, vacuum up or down?
It skips vacuum up and multiples vacuum down, and that is for planter average.
Yep.
Now, if we go back to the home screen, bottom right hand corner, and we see that, okay, we have a row that is holding down, like what 16 was doing earlier, and we go ahead and break into it. The process is visibly inspect the disc. If it follows the meter, visibly inspect the disc. Is that round hole true? Every one of you have spare discs that we need to keep in the cab. If that hole's true, swap the singulator with your spare singulator. Does it fix the problem or not? And we're able to systematically work through that to be able to get you back up to it, assuming that you can make a full round trip and that performance stays low. If it fixes itself, don't worry about it.
As a general rule, if you're doubling, something isn't allowing the second seed to fall off. So I either have a hole that's too big or my singulator's not knocking it off. If I have a skip on an individual row, something's not allowing the seed to stay on, right? So that means I've got a vac leak, I've got something obstructing after the seed is rolled through a singulator, the singulator's too aggressive, something along those lines. So just trying to understand from a basic standpoint, the multiple means something's not getting rid of seed. The skip means something is not allowing seed to stay there. And that's a different part on what we would change inside those meters. Generally speaking, keeping rodents out of the equation, V-sets are very, very low maintenance. Okay, E-sets, we got to watch singulators just a little bit. Normally not in season, it's in between seasons, so we watch that. But generally speaking, a V-set and V-drive is pretty maintenance-free throughout the season. Okay, we've got about 180,000 rows of them running. They're pretty low maintenance. Okay. Questions on singulation? Okay, everybody with us so far? All right, next thing we go to is spacing. So I have said I want X for population. Let's say it's an arbitrary 28,000. I have determined that the 28,000 is now coming out one seed at a time. Now I need to ignore any errors that occur there and start to address spacing. Okay? I want to assume that all the seed is coming out correctly, which is the way we bring information into the cab, is we want to separate singulation and spacing. Okay? Spacing is what happens after I get rid of the seed. Singulation is what's happening as I'm handling the seed inside the meter, okay? So next we're going to go in and we're going to look at something called SRI. Okay, I said we'd keep away from the acronym, so SRI stands for Seed Release Index. Okay, this is a measurement of seed-to-seed spacing relationship. Your goal here, low or upper single digits to low double digits. Okay, low meaning I want to be below 12. Well, excuse me, below 15. Thinking I want to be around 12 would be a great number to be around. To your eyes, when you walk out into a field and you look at an absolute picket fence stand, the ones that they print in the magazine and everything like that, that's about a 20 to 25 SRI. Okay? Realize that after seed goes past a seed tube sensor, there's going to be some manipulation of that seed, and that's where the difference between a 15 SRI and a 25 comes from, is after it goes past a sensor to when it stops in the ground. There's going to be some change that occurs. So the lower this number goes, the more consistently spaced out my seeds are. This number ignores any problems that are over here, so that we're not trying to fix one problem and fight another problem at the same time. So I'll get my singulation in my upper 99s, and then I'm going to look at SRI and try to keep that below 15. Okay? Now the question is, how do we do that, right? What impacts spacing? Speed, why? Okay, so there's two movements in speed that can impact a seed path to the ground, right? I have vertical bounce, okay? If we've got a hook in a seed tube, and if I bounce that seed tube up in the air, that's going to change the trajectory of the way that seed drops, right? So I've got to watch my vertical bounce. That's going to show up. We'll configure the screen here in just a second. I'll show you a good ride. The second one is that seed tube is sloped for roughly a 4 to 6 mile an hour speed. There's probably some actual number in between there that it was designed for. But if I get going too fast, it also changes where that seed path is at after it releases out of the meter. Okay? If I'm not an electric drive, I also have chains and clutches and transmissions and hanger bearings and whatever else in the process, right? That can change, or a ground drive wheel slides, or a chain's got a link that's froze up, or something along those lines, right? All of those can impact seed spacing. So we wrote down somewhere between 28 and 30,000 on population, right? Somewhere, I'm close. How many seeds per second is that? Okay. Random number, I'm going to say somewhere between 12 and 15 seeds per second, okay? Realizing this thing shoots faster than a Tommy gun will. So if I have a link on a chain, it seems kind of nitpicky to me to say that a link that causes just a small amount of vibration is going to cause an issue with my seed spacing. But when we're talking 12 to 15 seeds per second, I don't have but a couple of milliseconds of time to get that seed to release correctly, and any impact there is going to start to play with my spacing. So 1/100th of a second is about an inch traveled on the ground at 5 miles an hour. That's stuff we can't comprehend in this room. You can't see 1/100th of a second. You can't blink that fast. You can't see those errors across the planner. So we're going to rely on that number right there to bring that into a number that I can understand and that I can work with, right? So again, if that number starts to climb, I may need to slow down. If that number starts to climb, I may have forgot to put graphite and talc in with my meters, with my seed when I loaded the last time. So static electricity can cause just enough of a delay to cause that issue. I may have debris in my seed tube. If I'm a no-tiller, or if I've got some wheat chaff or something like that that's gotten up into the seed tube to where I've got a delivery issue, that may show up. So a lot of different things here, but what it is not, it's not singulation. Okay? So it's not inside the meter most likely, unless it's a static electricity issue. Hans, recommendation on graphite and talc down here.
1/4 cup per unit of seed, or 8 pounds per 3 Pro boxes.
Okay, how do you mix it?
As early as possible.
Broom handle? something like that when you fill your CCS. You pour a bunch in, half of it's on you when you leave, you know. There's no great way.
Mix it on the conveyor before it loads up is the best.
The best way is to get a Gandy box or something along those lines. There's a number of different types of treaters that'll put it right on your seed tenders. You're delivering seed to the field. Or if you're treating your own seed and sending it out to your customers, you could pre-treat it that way. But that's very, very important. You've got a lot of plastic components, a lot of air moving, so there's static electricity naturally generated in that. What is the talc for? So we've got 80% talc, 20% graphite. What's the talc for? How many guys think it's lubricant? Almost everybody thinks it's lubricant in every meeting that we go to. Okay, what is what is talc made out of? I believe it's gypsum. I'm pretty sure it's gypsum and a mix of some other stuff, but it's an abrasive. Okay, it's there to cut the static off. We need the graphite for the slick. We need that to help smooth everything out and help our delivery. That's why we run the 80-20 mix. There's some things out there, like in Canada, they're not allowed to run graphite and talc on any seed that's got a neonic on it for insecticide. So they're forced to run some Bayer fluency powder. Don't know if you guys have ever seen the fluency powder out there. It's a mess. Don't run it if you don't have to. They don't have a choice. They're stuck with it, but we've gone through like 9 formulations of it with Bayer, and we can't get it to run where our singulation and spacing wants to be. It's really, really tough. You don't have to buy our 80-20. There's plenty of people. I mean, we've got local guys in South Dakota that blend their own, whatever, run whoever you want. But 80-20 mix in the V sets, okay? 1/4 cup per unit. Blend it off as you see fit. But SRI could rise on that. Now, Stacy, let's go in and alter one of these numbers just for the sake of right now. Let's alter M set off of there. So on the Gen 3, back up for just a second, Stace. There's a number of different ways to change the layouts on your screens. Right now we're in the standard layout. Go ahead and touch metrics for me up at the top. Metrics gets rid of the map. If you don't want to look at the map or you've got the iPad running next to you, you could just crowd this all in with a bunch of data. We can go to large map over on the right if you want less data and just look at mapping. We can go that route, whichever way you want, or we can go back to standard and I can touch the tile button up here in the corner and I can configure the screen however I want. Okay, this is the nice thing that we weren't able to do as well with the Gen 2. So down here in the corner I can hit add widget and we can give you all kinds of crazy stuff on the screen. The one little difference between this and a Gen 2 is I can grab on the screen and I can scroll just like you would on an iPad or iPhone or anything else that you have. We can go small icons, wide ones, tall ones, large ones, extra large. If you have problems seeing numbers on some of these screens, go to your extra large. We can get big font for you so it's a whole lot easier to look at. Stace, let's go to a wide number. And we're going to look for, we're not going to put it back on the main screen, but we're going to look at good ride. Okay, and what good ride is, on each one of your rows you have an SRM or a RUM. SRM is the little black box, stands for a single row module. Okay, inside of that module is an accelerometer that's going to read whether or not it's traveling vertically. Okay, so I can't tell you how fast we're moving forward or any forces that are there. We don't have a sensor on that. But on each one of the rows, I can tell you if it's starting to bounce because we're driving too fast, we have some poor tillage work done, something like that. So I want to keep my good ride as absolute close to 100% as I can. In my world up in the big fields in South Dakota, good ride is my throttle. I will go as absolute fast as good ride will allow me to go until I start killing SRI. Okay, until I get into this, I'm moving too fast on the horizontal axis as opposed to the vertical. So pretty easy to keep good ride, close to 100%, but that's going to influence SRI. If it gets bad enough, we can actually influence some of the metering and singulation issues as well. Okay, so questions on good ride? All right, so I'll show you how to add that to the screen. So she's going to click on good ride, and now you can pick anywhere on that screen that you want to drop it. Now it may, if you put it over top, let's just put it right in the middle of the map just to show them what happens. Okay, it just got rid of my map, and now I've got all these extra tiles that I can work with. So I could go in, add widget again, and now I can either add a control, I can do a mini chart, go over to map, Stacy, and now let's go to a small map. We can get that size if she clicks on that. doesn't want to go. Oh, there you go. Now you can drag and drop that wherever you want. It's going to override over to good ride, so now we'd have to move good ride around. You can configure this however you guys want. If you want to change it on the fly, you can do this while you're planting. If you get bored during the day, you can dink around with that all you want, okay? So let's go back to add widget and let's talk about the rest of the things that I can measure on here. So we talked population. Good ride is our vertical bounce. SR ride is my seed to seed relationship on spacing. Again, we want to keep that below 15. Skips and doubles, I always like to have that. Vacuum left and right. A lot of guys like to have that on the screen. I will tell you, leave it off. It doesn't matter what they are. What matters is what the singulation is. It doesn't matter if you got to run 28 vac or 8 vac to get there. It's just an arbitrary number. It's just inches of water, doesn't mean anything. The left half of the planter might need 18, the right half of the planter might need 22. It doesn't matter what the number is. It used to, but it doesn't anymore, okay? Field acres, a lot of guys like that one. Acre counters on A and B, if you're trying to separate some record keeping, you can. I like this one when I'm trying to figure out how long until I need seed or how long I've got for the rest of the day going for the fields that I'm in. First field out, I really like that box to be up just so I don't have to do the math to figure out what my spacing's supposed to be. I can take that, go out, and I can do a bunch of digging on the ground, understand where I'm at. Again, a different counter. We can have a shortcut right to the diagnose page. You shouldn't need that. And then a number of other metrics we'll talk about here in a little bit. Up at the top, Stacy, go to controls for me, please. These are all the different controls that we have for each of the different systems that may be on the planter. We'll talk about all those in a little bit. Mini chart over here is like the second page that we go to on population or singulation. If you just want to see a bar chart on a given metric, you can see that. Some guys like those, and then again, the map, we have those. Okay. Once you're done with those, you just hit cancel to get back out of where you're going. You can rename some of these. You can set it up however you want. You can go back to a standard layout. You can literally do anything you want with it. Okay. So we've added the mini chart down here on the bottom. We've got a couple of big metrics on the left and right sides. Questions on what we've covered so far?
And you have different layouts. Can each pilot operates a planter make his own layout? So you don't
Yes.
need to drag it once you get in there?
Yep.
So you see the arrow to the left of the one up there at the top, you can have 7 different layouts within each of the screens and such.
And then back to the graphite. I know some of the graphite comes in big bags, but if you shake the graphite up, it kind of doubles in size. So does that go back to your cup or cup?
Yeah, we kind of need to add volume and not compacted and such, otherwise you'll use too much. Which it's not going to hurt, we're just going to go through it faster.
I would say it's probably like making bread. I don't know if any of you guys ever use a bread maker or anything like that. If I take a 1 cup measuring cup and I scoop it into the flour and pack it in there and scrape it off, I'm going to have terrible bread. If you sift it in there, shake your flour up and then you scoop it and level it off so you have a loose, not a compacted, you'll be a lot better off on there. On the E-flow, and depending on what you have for a planter, on the E-flow, we've got a lid that goes on top of the jug that has a flipper lid in it. You flip the jug upside down, 1 flip, 1/8 of a cup, second flip is a 1/4 cup. Okay, if you're running a box planter, that's a really easy way to do that and mix it in with your seed. Very first startup of the season, before you put seed in the planter, I would go dump some in there, fire up your center fill delivery and let it push everything back out, find your mouse nest, whatever else is in the system before you load it full of seed. Invariably, there's always something in there if you forget to do that when there's a full tote where the seed's sitting on top of it. Apparently avocados are getting recalled. Any questions on what we've covered so far? All right. So an alignment question just for the room, because I don't know anybody in this room. Is this too basic, just right, or you want to go more basic? Good so far? Okay. I just don't want to dumb it down so bad that everybody's like, that was like the most elementary thing I've ever heard in my life, and then I don't want to talk over people's heads either. So, all right, let's talk about in the middle of the screen now. We'll just work our way from left to right. We're going to get into this number later, as well as these, because that all ties into smartphone. We'll get to those here in just a minute. So another big difference between a Gen 2 and a Gen 3 monitor is we now have live color mapping that wasn't designed by Atari in the middle of the screen, right? So in the upper left-hand corner, I have my legend or my map metric that I'm looking at, and then I have my legend on the left. I can also turn my legend off if I'd like to. So Stace, go ahead and hit the metric up there. Here's all of the different maps that we can look at a given time on the screen. Okay? I'm kind of a visual guy. I like to look at my singulation, and I like to look at my downforce on the same screen as I'm going through the field. On the initial field, when I first get started, am I getting my singulation on my metering right, and is that planter getting to depth? Okay? I just need yes or no answers to those as I go. So I'm going to look at both of those maps. So let's start with singulation, Stacy. Okay, so it's going to pull up my singulation map. I'm looking for all green. Again, trying to stay with the theme that green is good. Anything other than that needs to be addressed. I can split this in half on the right-hand side. And now instead of SRI, I'm going to switch that to downforce. Again, typically in my operation of a planter, I want to know right in the initial startup of the first field when everybody's still uncomfortable with your equipment, am I getting one seed? Is it getting to depth? I'll work on everything else as soon as I'm comfortable on these two metrics. Okay. On the downforce screen, this is the one that gets a little more challenging to understand, and we're going to go into downforce here in just a second. But there's two main maps for downforce. The question of did I get to the mechanical depth stop on my planter, and how did I get to my mechanical depth stop? Okay. When I go up here to my metrics, I've got downforce. Go ahead and click on that, Stace. Sure. And then I've got applied downforce. So let's go ahead and hit applied downforce. These are your two metrics for downforce. One is did I get to depth? One is how did I get to depth? Okay, with me so far? Downforce is the measurement of is something standing on the bathroom scale that is the load cell on the planter. So whatever your mechanical depth stop is, did I get to it? Did I physically stop the planter from going deeper? Okay, if that is true, it will not be blue. If you see blue, I have not hit my physical depth stop, whatever that is. Now, we don't know where that is. I don't know if that's a 1/4 inch. I don't know if that's 4 inches, so that's going to depend on where the mechanical setting on your planter is. The left map over here is how much weight did I apply through my downforce system to get there. Okay? That could be a spring. That could be a hydraulic system. That could be an airbag. Doesn't matter what it is. I can measure some sort of an applied force over here to tell me how I got to my map of yes or no. Okay? I want this map to not have blue on it. As much as possible. I'd like to not have red with it either, but there are cases where I need red, and it depends on how I have my legend set up. Okay? This is the one where you get all the cool maps of here's, a four-wheeler track or a skid steer that went out in the field and picked up a rock or whatever it is. Those are the maps where it tells you all your variability inside your field. I should not see much of that over on this side. This should be a more consistent map. Okay? Go ahead and let's go back to a single screen. Go back up to downforce on our metric. So again, we're changing our metric in the corner. You can look at any of the maps that you want. If you're trying to assess good ride, I've run, let's say I've run a Lemkin versus a Salford in a field, and I'm trying to compare two different tillage tools that I've used in a given field. I want to look at good ride between the two of them. I can flip up a good ride map. If I want to see my seeding prescription, or if I want to see my liquid application, whatever it may be, if I want to yell at an operator later in the season for driving too fast and he says, I never once went over 5 miles an hour, you pull the speed map and he's running 7.5. Maybe you pull 7.5 and singulation was perfect and SRI was right and downforce, maybe it was all good, I don't know. But you can pull all these different maps however you want. Okay? Go ahead and hit cancel. New this season, in the new software, we can connect to a Wi-Fi hotspot on your phone, and I can put a satellite background on here. We're not going to do that because it doesn't work very well with our demo. But you can put the satellite Google backdrop just like you had on an iPad or on your iPhone on your maps or whatever. You can put that in the background. You just pair that with whatever device you want in the cab.
Can you put your prescription on the background?
It'll be a separate map layer, so we can go into split screen, we can load that. The population will also show you what was deployed as far as the prescription goes.
Do that on the iPad, can
You can do it on the iPad, yeah.
Just make sure.
Yeah, there's
you want
more
to paint over
background,
top, right?
multi-layer function.
Just to make sure.
We should do that. I don't know if we are, but we should do that.
It does load up.
It does?
It does load up
Okay.
on the Gen 3, I think.
As a map layer, but
Yeah.
it's same as downforce, so it wouldn't necessarily
Stace,
be as
go
a background.
go in here. go to our seating prescription. I don't know if there's one loaded for this field or not. Because on the iPad, you can have it as a background layer and then plant over top of it, and you can see that you're actually hitting your target and things like that. We'll double check that at the break, and I'll find out. I don't know that answer off the top of my head. Another thing that we've done is up here in the corner, there's guys that just have different preferences of how they plant. So go ahead and hit the arrows, and we can go north, true, and then we can get into, go ahead and click that stays. All right, hit the tractor. We can pivot it down like you're following it with a helicopter if you want, through some of those. We're running an older software on the computer demo because they don't have an HDMI cable in here, so some of these functions are a little wonky in the demo.
Once you get to the field, we'll go through this and get all this stuff loaded up so it's functional for you.
Yep. Bottom left-hand corner of the screen, if you hit off, if this is taking up too much real estate, you can get rid of that. Field name in the bottom center. Okay, any questions on the map in the center? Good so far? All right, let's talk about downforce. Okay, probably the most confusing topic that's in the monitor. And so we're going to flip over to a PowerPoint. We'll get out of the monitor here for just a second. Go ahead and pull that slide up. So let's make sure that we understand what we're trying to do before we look at the data coming back and misunderstand that, okay? Now, we've used this slide for like going on 10 years, and for some reason, I don't know why, we can't get a picture of a planter with parallel arms sitting correctly. So excuse us on that one, but if your planter is running like this through the field, we need to make a change. But it's an interesting topic to talk about since we're talking about operations. How do you make that change? If you're going through the field like that, what do you adjust? Where? A lot of different ways to do it, and it depends on the model of planter that you have. Anybody in here run a DB planter? Okay, so on the DBs, life is a little bit different than everybody else. Everybody else gets to run and make a change in the axle bolt back here in the corner, or back here on your lift wheels. On your 3-point, we can lower it down, and then you've got your flotation wheels that are there. You may have to make the adjustment to pitch that bar. Maybe it's a top link adjustment, whatever it may be. On the DB planters, do not assume that you're showed up from factory correctly, and do not assume that one year to the next it's going to stay the same. Underneath your center fill tank are your 2 main lift cylinders that sit in there, right? There are 2 pins or there's a pin at the top. There's 2 holes available. Okay, the very top pin sets the bar down low. The bottom hole lifts it up. It's about a 4-inch difference between those 2. Okay, so I've seen a number of times where we're going through the field like this, and what happens is as this bar raises and the row unit is down, we're not going to get as much weight applied here, and it's going to ask for more weight here. And when I apply more weight here, this goes up. This goes up, this says I need more, this gives more, and it lifts more. And you play the scissor game before long, it's off the ground. You go pull the airbag line that's going into that airbag, and you can watch that whole frame settle down right in front of you, okay? So depending on the field conditions, and I used to say this was a conventional till, no-till thing, and I'm not sure that that's the greatest advice, but if you need to lower the bar on your DB, you move those center pins, okay? You can move them to the top. The way I do that, you don't need cribbing, you don't need jacks, you don't need anything like that. You need a guy in the cab, you need to turn your hydraulics all the way down and have somebody feather the hydraulics until that cylinder pin is loose. Pull the pin, raise the hydraulics, shove the pin back in, go to the other side. Okay? You may need to do this from field to field if you have drastic changes in tillage. Okay? It's a really easy thing to do if somebody greased the pin. It's really hard to do if nobody has ever greased that pin. Okay? But I've seen some really, really, really drastic differences in DB planters. That's the predominant planter in my part of the world. It's probably 8 out of 10 planters are DBs. So really pay attention to that. If you have removed your markers off your planter, get wings or get weight back out on your wings, especially on the 3-frame, non-5 frame section DBs, the older ones where they only have the center wing flex on them. We need that weight to hold the wings back down. Start the season with the weight there. If it gets wet and we have to take them off, it's a lot easier than if we need them. And then you got to go get brackets and everything all figured out. It's a lot easier to get rid of weight than it is to add it in the season. Otherwise, on these, we're going to change the spindle location. Each of those lift assist wheels all have brackets on either side of them. There's about 6 holes that are there. Each hole will typically make you about a 2-inch difference in bar height. How many guys in the room running Deltaforce? Okay. My recommendation to you, I don't know if we've ever talked about this or not, get out in the field, get your depth where you want it. Stop with the planter in the ground. Don't lift it or anything else. When you stop, Deltaforce stops responding. It relaxes. And you'll see your bar twitch and it'll drop just a little bit. My recommendation to you is when you're stopped in the field, make sure that that bolt is about 1 inch lower than that bolt, which is against everything you've ever been told by anybody at Precision or anybody anywhere, right? The reason I say that is when you take off and you start moving, you're going to see that bar flinch, and it's going to flinch up because the delta cylinder started pushing back down. It will flinch and pull those back to level. If I start at level, when it flinches, it goes back up, right? And now the more I start pushing, it keeps lifting and lifting and lifting on me. So the downforce systems, whether it's an airbag, a spring, a hydraulic cylinder, or any other mechanical way of doing it, this thing, whatever it is here pushing down, has to have ballast out of that bar to get it there, okay? I either have ballast and I push it on the row, or I don't have ballast and I lift the bar, one of the two. Okay, so the downforce systems can apply up to 650 pounds down. What that means to you as an operator is your planter, bar, system, assembly, center fill, tanks, whatever, has to weigh more than the physical number of row units times 650, or it will lift the bar off the ground. Now, very, very, very rarely do I ever see 650 pounds applied. It's more, top end is probably more 400. So look at the physical rows on your planter times whatever your max downforce is set in the screen, and it has to weigh that or it'll lift the bar off the ground. Okay, does that make sense? Especially in a 3-point planter. That's the biggest culprit of those, just because they're light planters. They don't tend to have a lot of weight on them. There's not a lot of center fill weight hanging on them. There's not a lot of tanks or anything like that. But let's go through this screen and just make sure that we're all on the same page. Okay. My goal here on a planter is I'm going to set a depth across all rows, okay? Some mechanical arbitrary depth. On a Deere planter, there's a T-handle. There's a T-handle on case. On some of the whites, on the case, it's a rotary screw. Somehow, there is a mechanical linkage in here that prevents the gauge wheel from going higher than your intended depth, okay? That's what's going to bear the bottom of the disc opener and set your depth, okay? When we hit that mechanical stop, we have a load sensor that's sitting there that tells us that now I have weight, and that weight is being carried right down here on the bottom of the gauge wheel. Make sense so far? Okay. As I go through a field, so let's start early in the season. It tends to be a little bit cooler in the season. Is dirt easier to get into when it's cold or when it's warm? Page 1 of the agronomy book. It depends, right? So as I'm going through the dirt, let's say I'm going to plant 3 miles per hour. I'm going to plant in a field that looks like this. Life's pretty easy on me. Does it take a lot of weight to get this in the ground to 2 inches, or does it take a little bit of weight in this particular type of an environment? A little bit, right? I've got some residue present down on the ground, right? And I've got a row cleaner up front. Let's envision that this one actually has an air cylinder on it that I can adjust from the cab and not have to adjust that bolt. Okay, so let's assume it has clean sweep. If I see residue back here near the furrow, what do? More row cleaner, less row cleaner? When you apply more row cleaner, what did you just do to the row unit? Did you add weight or take weight away? You picked it up, right? Okay. As I push down here, the equal and opposite effect lifts this up. Now, I've got a closing system back here, and last season you ran with these, and this year you put some other type of wheel on there, and you decided you got to make an adjustment. It's not aggressive enough, so you went another notch on the closing wheel. What did you do to the row unit? Up or down? Up, right? Opposite effect of pushing here is to lift here. So I'm pushing up here from trying to shove a double disc opener in the ground. I'm pushing up here because I'm trying to get cleaning power, and I'm trying to destruct the furrow. So I've got weight being applied here that's lifting. Now, if I have insecticide, which isn't the most common thing in this part of the world from my understanding, I would have weight adding and removing here. If I'm a box planter, I've got weight adding and removing here. And if I'm a center fill that doesn't exist if I don't have insecticide. That doesn't exist. My row unit's going to weigh somewhere between 150 and 250 pounds, depending on a lot of conditions, right? So I'm pushing down, I'm pushing up. The map that we're looking at that is downforce, when I paint blue, what is it telling me? When it says loss of ground contact, what is that map telling me? Okay. When I have blue, I have 0 here. I have not hit whatever the mechanical stop is that is setting my depth. Okay, follow me so far? When I have red, it means I have way too much here, not enough here, and I'm carrying a lot of weight here. All right, so let's go to Walmart for a second. I'm going to buy a bag of potting soil. I'm going to dump it in just a barrel of any type, and I'm going to take a tile spade, and I'm going to shove that tile spade in the ground. I'm going to pull it right back out. What's down there where the tile was at? Is there a hole or is there nothing? Did it collapse or did it stay open? Collapsed, right? This is another one of those, it depends. If it's soaking wet, it probably stays open, right? But if it's just a bag of potting soil, it probably collapsed, right? You're doing the same thing right here. That's your tile spade. This is your bucket of soil. I'm going to stick something in the ground and I'm going to make a hole and I'm going to try to get a seed to the bottom of that hole. Okay? I have to have more plus than minus in order for this to hit its depth stop. But I also have to have enough plus that the tile spade leaves a hole in the ground. My double disc openers have to hit a furrow that stays open until my seed gets there. If I'm too light, that sidewall will slough on me and it collapses, and dry dirt will be the first thing that hits the bottom of that furrow. And you'll have seed laying right on top of dry dirt. Okay? So let's call that term firming force. Okay? Some people like to call that margin. I need more weight than what it takes to get to my depth stop, and then I have to add enough to get a true V opened up and get that seed to the bottom without anything underneath it. Everybody with me so far? This is where you have to dig. My recommendation is pull those 2 bolts. A couple days before you want to go to the field, okay? Get close to your planting conditions, pull those bolts off a couple rows. There's a lot of guys that will take a ratchet strap and tie that up. I've never had good luck with it. It still seems like it manipulates a bunch of stuff, and it's out of the way if you take it off. It's 2 bolts. It doesn't take very long. And I want to put that thing in the ground, and I want to get up to speed, and I want to understand what my furrow looks like. I should see a true V sitting there. I should have seed at the bottom of it, and if I touch a sidewall, it should cave in. Okay? I shouldn't have to take a knife and destruct it and all of that mess, but I should see a clean furrow underneath it. If I have dry dirt underneath that seed and I put a seed on top of it and I don't dig, and it rains 3 days from now, can I tell that I had dry dirt underneath there? If I spin the pivot on top of it, can you see dry dirt underneath it? Do you have a depth problem? We have variable depth, right? We hit depth. The map says we were good, but I have to find out where that firming force is at. I need to make sure, and what we're going to do is we're going to set that for your delta target. So that arbitrary 90 or 100 or 140 or 50 or whatever that number is going to be determined by you digging and finding out this year's conditions. If there's drastic weather events throughout planting, I would re-dig that and figure out if you're balanced out right. Delta will take care of the variability from row to row once you find your baseline. That's what we're looking for, okay? So in order for the true statement to occur where I have more weight here than weight here, and that I have enough weight for firming force, the only possible way for that to remain a true statement is to vary this number right here. Because that's a variable number, that's a variable number, that's a variable number, and both of those are variable numbers. The only way to keep everything a true statement is to have an active system here. But I have to dig and know where to set the active system. Delta doesn't know where the proper moisture's at. It doesn't know where the sidewalls are sloughing. There's no way to see that. Okay? We'll talk about smart firmer and how that's going to give you some information here in just a little bit. But without smart firmer on there, you're going to have to dig out and understand what's going on the backside. Okay? Questions on that slide and that concept there? Because that's the one that a lot of times at the end of a meeting, guys will come up and they go, so what's the number I should set it at? Which tells me I'm not doing a good job of conveying that message. It's not that they're not understanding. I'm not teaching it right. So does anybody have questions on this part here?
So you're gonna get into that, what that number should be, you go out and if it doesn't collapse or if you've got dry dirt, you increase it.
Yep. So if we're sloughing, okay, if the sidewall is collapsing, I've got dry dirt, increase downforce.
Increase with the target.
Yep.
Your target.
Yep. I would move in 10-pound increments. That's, unless we're way off and you don't even have a furrow, developed at all, then you go way up, right? I got a real good friend that runs race cars. He runs high-performance late-model dirt track cars. He said, if you ever get lost, make really big adjustments. You'll find out one way or another which way you need to go. He said, don't make little ones, make big ones, and you'll get caught up a lot faster. So if you're way off, make big adjustments. If you're just trying to fine-tune, and chances are the fine-tuning is going to be 10 pounds above and beyond, what your map is telling you. But please, 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 please dig. It's a really, really bad conversation in June when we're looking at emergence and it was preventable problems, right? It was a lack of digging. I've got a grower up north that's got about 4,000 acres that had just atrocious emergence. Seed doesn't move after it's in the ground, right? It doesn't change. The profile was there the day of planting and it just never got looked at. The maps told him, all the red flags were there, but any questions on this concept there?
The one assumption we should address on is that gauge wheel is snug against the disc so that dry dirt cannot come up between the two.
Do you have the 2x4 slide? I'm going to go to one other slide because there's one other assumption that we're making as well inside of here. Yeah,
The opposite of that then is.
Go back one slide.
That you're slabbing or like you said, you can't collapse it, obviously.
Yep. Sorry, I forgot to do the second half. If I touch that sidewall and it's hard and it doesn't want to collapse, it's not friable, I guess would be the proper term for it. If it's not collapsing and my closing wheels are going to struggle, or if I'm running my closing wheels and I still see evidence of a V back there, we're too heavy on downforce and we need to back off on that. Now again, the automated downforces, whether it's ours or anybody else's, will take care of the row-to-row and the micro environments in the field, but we've got to find the baseline for a given year. And that's generally going to be driven by either tillage type, if you made changes from one year to the next, or generally moisture levels. A really, really moist field just short of saturation is going to need way less downforce than what a really dry, droughty field is going to be like we planted into last year.
And there's in the Downforce operator's guide, there's a good explanation on step by step how to set the system. And what you're looking for in the field.
How many guys do not have a John Deere planter in here? Anybody? Okay. Let's assume that you got a planter that was built Wednesday morning. Everybody was good. Everybody was happy at the factory. Everything got built perfect. Okay. You didn't get Monday morning. You didn't get Friday afternoon. You got Wednesday morning. Okay. When it comes out of the factory, it should be something very close to that screen right there. And I will get in arguments in every meeting that I do that I have never once planted 2-inch corn with my handle positioned right there. Anybody make that statement in here? That is not 2 inches on my farm? Okay. This is where it's supposed to be from factory. Okay. We've taken factory planters and we found variance in here. We've taken used planters and found no variance, and we found everything in between. Okay. 36 row 20 dB planter that ran on our ground a couple years ago, I found 10 out of 36 rows varied by up to 3/4 of an inch. Again, delta force is not going to know. All it knows is we hit the mechanical depth stop. If that depth stop is at 1/4 on this row and 4 inches on this row, it's going to bury the 4 inch. Now, what happened in the past, before sensors were on these planters, I had a lot of guys that ran 2 inches down here. Okay? Were they planting 2 inches? Yeah, they dug. They found 2-inch corn. Were they set for 2 inches? No. When they went into low ground and it was a little bit muckier or wet, so I'm really flat where we're at, kind of similar to this, but we get pothole after rains in the spring, we'll get some potholes and they'll plant through them. They'll be dry enough to plant through, but they're kind of mucky and nothing comes up. Why? Well, it was wet. They drowned out, right? It's just a wet spot. The problem is these guys are set down here, and in the normal field, the downforce that they were running without a sensor they were only getting to 2 inches of depth. They didn't have enough force to push it in. They got to the wet ground and it buried that thing all the way to the 3.5 mark. That's why it didn't come out of the ground. It wasn't because it was bad ground or a pothole. It was because we buried it in those sections. Well, you never got out and dug in the pothole, right? Nobody wants to stand in there. You're not stopping the planter in that area. So let's assume that this is perfect and you plant 1,000 acres and you burn a 1/2 inch off your discs. Does that chart still hold true? Which way is it off? It's 1/2 inch shallow, right? How many guys change depth throughout the season? That's always the fun conversation in the meeting, because guys will sit back there and they'll be like, hold on a minute, I got to catch up to where you're at. No, we've never done that. No, we've never thought about that. We're not raising our hand on that one. Next slide. So realize they're going to change. It's a mechanical piece. They're not all cast identical. There's variance, right? It's just nature. You can build these however you want, okay? This is just my personal preference of how we build them out, okay? What you need to do is build yourself a set of blocks of some sort, okay? Some guys will use a 4x4, whatever you want to use underneath here. I'm going to set these under every single row on the planter every single year. Set the gauge, set your depth handle where you want it, okay? It doesn't matter what the number is, just set it close to where you feel like you want to plant. And then I'm going to set down on top of these blocks. In this particular instance, I've got a 2x4 piece of lumber, which is how thick? 1.5 inches. I've got a 1/2 inch sheet of plywood, which within a 32nd is a 1/2 inch thick, right? So I have a 2 inch thick piece of board. I have set my handle at 2 inches. If I set the planter down on those blocks, the gauge wheel should not turn and the disc opener should be just touching the ground. Everybody follow so far? If the gauge wheels are spinning freely, am I too deep or too shallow? Too deep, right? So I make an adjustment on my T-handle until this is true. Okay? And then I can put a metal marker next to my T-handle setting and say that row is at 2 inches, that row is at 2 inches, that row is over here at 2 inches, and you nominalize that planter out. Okay? When I get to the field, I may not be at 2 inches here because I still have to worry about compression and this true point isn't seen in the dirt. I've got some variance there, right? But every row is going to be at the same and I can move every row up and down 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch, whatever I need to do to get that depth. Has anybody in here ever done this test? What'd you find? Big difference. You guys did it as well? What'd you find? Okay.
Yeah, there was a lot of difference.
How long did it take you guys to do the test?
47 rows, took about an hour.
Worth it? Did you keep the blocks? Yeah. Takes longer to make the blocks than use the blocks. Keep the blocks. Okay? Please do this. If you do nothing else out of everything we talk about today, please do this test before you go to the field. I promise you it's worth the time you spend on it. Okay? I had a 15,000 acre farm. We were on our ground. We rent all our ground out, but they farm about 6,000 acres. And the 15,000 acre farmer in the county came over and was watching us. He goes, "What in the world are you guys doing? You're crawling all over this thing like a bunch of mice, And I explained through, and he kind of gets this look on his face. He jumps up in the cab, and I'm explaining what we're doing and whatnot. All right, I got to go. Call me and tell me what you find out. We called him. I said, 10 out of 36 rows. Can we borrow the blocks? So they share the blocks back and forth, but we have found brand new planters with variance. We have found, I've probably asked this question in groups this size all the way up to groups 100, 150 people. I have found 4 guys in 5 years that have said they found no variance. Pretty good chance you've got it, okay? Just please do that check. It won't take you a lot of time. So once we have this, then Delta can perform. But the downforce systems, whether it's ours or Deere's or Agler's, doesn't matter whose it is, they all base off of that sensor hitting on the depth, on the mechanical depth stop, okay? All right, so let's go back to the 2020. We'll talk about depth for just a second more, and then we'll take a break.
So to answer your question on prescriptions for this year, the upcoming planting season, you can't put the population up over a prescription. You would have to split screen it. It's slated to work on this summer, so it'll be there for next year, but for this year, it's just split screen.
Thank you. All right, so left-hand side over here, okay, I have downforce. Ground contact means what? Yep. We have physically met the limitation that you set on that planner that is the depth stop, right? Our goal is to keep that number 100%. That means 100% of the planner has been in the ground at its depth stop over the last X period of time. And we're not going to talk about the different measurements of time, okay? It varies based on system, but let's just say we're taking a reading every 7/16 of an inch on the ground at 5 miles an hour. Got a pretty good idea whether that planter's on the ground or not, okay? You will see it bounce and vary. It'll go from 98 to 99 to 100. There's a pretty big and tight correlation between yield fall off and loss of ground contact. Of course, if it rains tomorrow after planting, it's going to cover up all these sins. They'll show up in August when it tips over. You'll blame it on 1197 apparently, whatever, okay? So we want to keep our ground contact as absolute close as we can. We want to minimize margin to a certain extent, but once I know that I'm here and I've got my downforce set, that's when I'm going to walk out to the planter, back behind it, and I'm going to dig right behind that planter with it in the ground and look at that furrow creation and find out if that V is present. Find out that the seed is down at the bottom of that furrow and that life is looking good there. Okay? If I'm digging behind closing wheels, you should see zero evidence of a V trench. It's like somehow magically seed got placed down at a certain area and it's encapsulated with potting soil. Okay? That's our ultimate goal. Okay? As we're going through and we're looking at the downforce screen, go ahead and turn my legend on if you would, please. Blue again says, hey, we hit a spot, I'm too light. The greens and yellows are a general rule of running correctly. Once I dig, I'll confirm whether that's true or not. Red says, I have the potential to be too heavy, and if the moisture is present in the soil, I could be causing compaction. Now, if it's like northern South Dakota the last 2 years, you couldn't compact nothing. You run a freight train across that field, you're not compacting nothing because there's no moisture there. Okay? So it all depends on what field conditions are going to look like. That may vary, again, if you start planting dry and the second half of planting, it's monsoon season and all you're doing is fighting weather, you may want to redig and check where your setting is at. Now, we'll talk about all the settings and controls here after the break. But is there any questions on the screens on the downforce or on the applied or anything else that we've covered so far? Clear as mud? All right. One other thing, just to be clear on this, the load cell sensor that's back on the planter is reading 200 times a second. So there's a lot of opportunity to take a lot of samples across that planter. If something happens and that load cell goes bad, it will shut that load cell off and it'll look at the 80th percentile of the planter and run off that. You're not going to be dead in the water sitting still. There's another situation that could occur where we don't trust the data. The load sensor is functionally working, but we don't trust the data, okay? On an iPad map, and we'll just talk about that because that's probably what most of the guys in the room have seen. On the iPad map, you would see a painted map like this with a bunch of gray streaks for the length of the field, or a certain portion of the field that goes gray to the other end of the field. You turn around and it's gray for a while and all of a sudden it comes back on and you go, man, we got something wrong with the load cell. Let's change that load cell out. Don't be in a hurry to change load cells, okay? If we talk 2008 to 2015 John Deere planter load cells, they were crap, they broke, okay? I'll acknowledge that for everybody that's been with us for a while, right? There was a high likelihood that there was something wrong there. They made a significant engineering change to those pins after, if you bought one after, let's say, October, September of 15, they are rock solid, okay? They are in a single-digit failure mode, okay? What happens is as we're going through the field, and I'll use a situation from home, okay? Pretty flat fields, but you got a drainage ditch that goes through the middle of it. We got big planters up there, so as that wing goes through that drainage ditch, let's say row 17 carries through that. Okay, it's not able to get down into the ground. So Delta's applying, load cell says, hey, there's nothing going on down here. Something's wrong. All the rest of the rows are looking good except 17's not right. And it'll flag that cell, okay? I'm going to have you stand over here for a second. I got a really bad analogy, okay? So 17's not behaving and the data's not like the rest of the planter. There's an anomaly, right? So we physically take 17 in the data platform and we throw it into a jail cell and we close the door, okay? 17 is ignored. We're not controlling to it. It doesn't exist. It is a gray line on the map as if it got unplugged, okay? Everybody with me so far? You ever seen this on your screens?
So what pressure is the cylinder Delta force putting on it then?
it's at the 80th percentile of the planter. So we take the highs and the lows out, control to the middle 80 or the Olympic average, okay? So chances are it's probably good, okay? In the realm of good. It's not perfect, but it's not planting in the air. Prior to 15, what would happen if that failure occurred? That planter could break the load cell. Let's say the load cell breaks and it's reading 110 pounds, okay? If it broke, it would lock at 110. You're controlling to 100. If my load cell says 110, you're controlling to 100. What is the command of the cylinder going to be? Lift. 1/5 of a second later, it sees that it's at 110 and it wants 100. What's it do? Lift, 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 and it's out of the ground as high as it'll go, and it's behind your CCS tank, and you can't see it, and you plant half the day that way. It's a really, really bad phone call to get, okay? So what we did is we developed a library of pin logs that says, hey, 17's not right. We throw 17 in the jail cell, okay? 17's in jail until I get to the end of the field, and this is the most important part. You guys can hit 0 pin until your fingers bleed. Nothing is going to happen. What has to happen is we get to the end of the field, and it sees the lift switch say lifted, then lowered, okay? Once I go lift, then lower, I open the jail cell. I tell 17, you stand right here on the line, behave yourself. If you behave yourself, we'll let you play, but stay right there, and we'll watch him for the next 120 seconds. And if he behaves and the data is good and it looks like a functional pin, after 120 seconds, I'll let him back in the room and he can go back and play. And that's where you see the gray line on the screen switch and start painting again. We watched that data for 120 seconds. It looked good. It wasn't erroneous. We let him back in. Now, if he faults again, we throw him back in. We close the door. When we lift and we lower, we open the door, say, behave yourself. Okay? That does not mean that the pin is bad. Okay? So we'll talk about load pin diagnostics here in a little while. Faulted is the jail cell. Failed means it's unplugged or there's something physically broken in it. Okay? Those are the two diagnostic pieces. Hans knows all of this. Just call him if you have a question on your load cells. Okay? I don't expect you to know this, but I don't want guys being in a hurry to change load cells out.
And a common thing is if you're planting the headlands on the field and on the pivot and you're next to a road and that one wing's holding, or that one row unit's hanging over in the road, that disc opener's not going to reach at depth. It's going to trigger all this stuff and it's going to fault it out. So that's a very, very common one that will end up happening.
And I've seen too many guys spend a bunch of time before they call anybody, and they put 3 or 4 or 5 load cells, and by the time they get a hold of us, they're slightly mad, maybe a lot mad. You know, they've wasted a lot of time switching these, and it's still not solving the problem. It's not the load cell, okay? If it was pre-15 load cells, there's a chance, okay? Yeah, it's largely been handled so far. So just want you guys to know that's what's happening on that screen when it goes gray. It's an absence of data because we locked it out. We don't trust the data, so we're not going to control the bad data, okay? All right, so questions from what we covered so far? Everybody good? All right. Oh, I love stupid questions because they never are.
Is a bunch of this, or some of it, in a new software update? Because I don't remember the arrows at the top scrolling across.
I think that's new this year.
Okay.
Yep. Yep. Pretty sure that one's new. So.
Yeah, I didn't want to exercise my finger.
Yeah. So there's a few changes that we've made. Nothing super major that alters the way you do things. But for the most part, we're pretty straightforward. So not a stupid question. Thanks for asking. All right. So one of the other things I like to cover in these meetings is if you guys are like our guys up north, the very first time you hook onto a planter for the season and you go to unfold it, especially if you got like a DB or something like that, it takes you a while to unfold that planter the first time, right?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, the hose is backwards, got to flip that one, and was it this lever, that lever, which switch? By the end of planting, you guys can do it blindfolded while you're talking on the phone, right? It happens. And so a lot of the stuff in the monitor is the same way. You just haven't thought about it for a while. And so there's a couple things that I want to talk about before we get into the control screen. So ignore the ugly layout that I have now chosen to put in front of you. I'm just doing it so we've got all the right boxes up and we're able to see those. But there's a couple things that we need to do every time we go to the field. So Stacy, if you would hit setup for me down here in the corner. So setup is the wrench that's in everybody else's screens. That's where we're going to go to all of our background information. Every single time I go to a field, I need to know 4 things. Okay? What am I? Where am I? What are we going to do? And how much are we going to do? Okay? That's all the monitor needs to know to function. Okay? So first thing is what? What am I? Okay? Anybody in here run a split row planter? A 30-inch, 15-inch spliner? Okay. That makes life easy. Don't mess with anything in here. Okay? That's Hans's button. You guys stay out of there. Okay? You can't hurt anything in the monitor. We can always get you back to where you need to be. But this should always say your physical width of your planter and the physical number of rows that are attached to that bar. Okay? Once that's set up, just leave it alone. There's no reason to be in there unless you're a split planter guy. Okay? So I know what I am. What are we going to do? Okay? That's the next thing. And so this is going to tell me that I'm going to run 2 different hybrids in here. I'm going to run an insecticide and I'm running a liquid program. So it needs to know what that's going to be. Okay? Now some of you may be data nuts that have got 15 years worth of stuff in a computer running SMS or FarmWorks or something. Some of you have never collected any data in your life. Okay? See no value in it. At some point in the future, all of this data will get crunched locally at your farm and turn into something meaningful. It may not be your generation, it might be the next, but you cannot replace information after it's already presented, right? We can't go in and manipulate this to remember what it was 10 years from now. So take the extra few seconds to put the information in and collect the data so that we know what we're doing in the field and you can go back and reference that stuff later, okay? It takes just a few seconds to do it. So we need to know, what am I, what are we doing, and where am I, okay? So as I pull into a field, the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change my field. So Stacy, go ahead and touch anywhere inside of that field button. Our hierarchy, the way we work inside the system is I have an overarching client, which is me. Okay, that's Troy. I'm the client, unless I'm doing custom planting, and then I can have a Bill and a John and a Jerry and whatever else. Then I'm going to go down into a farm, and that's going to be my next subset underneath that of I've got these farms that I rent. These are my own farms. This is another tenant, whatever. I can go through and collect those farms out, and then I can go in and create fields underneath each of those farms. That's how our organization structure is set up. So Stacy, go ahead and go into client. Okay, it comes from the factory with demo client, demo farm, demo field. I've watched people plant 3,000 acres in demo client, demo farm, demo field. And then they're like, this stuff's amazing. I should get the combine system, and it's a nightmare at that point, okay? Do it as you want. Doesn't matter how you set it up, okay? If I want to put a new client in, down at the bottom, you hit add new client. Go ahead and put me in, Stace. Okay. And then we're going to hit enter, so that's going to list out all my clients, and I can continue adding those as much as I want. She's going to go ahead and select me. Now, we haven't gone any further, so there's no farms and there's no fields yet, so I've got to add a farm. Go ahead and make a farm for us. Okay. Now we're going to select that farm, and now it's looking for all the fields that are in there. Of course, I don't have those yet, so we're going to create a farm real quick. Field 1 is fine. What did you do? I didn't add that for some reason.
It's in the search box.
That was a test to see if you guys knew. Oh, live demonstrations. You never know what's going to happen. So it's being awesome and not letting us go. All right, so back out of that. So you would have a field in there. You select all your fields.
The other thing we'll mention at this point is when you plug the iPad in, all of the client farm field structure that you've already created in field view will automatically populate in here, and ideally we won't have to create something in season unless you go grab something additional or a custom job or whatnot. But if you have to do this, this is how we go about it.
All right, so once we get the field pulled up, this is where we're going to make all of our assignments to that field. We don't go outside and bring prescriptions away or anything like that. All that happens inside your field setup. So client farm field, we've got that all set up in here. If you want a boundary file, you can load those in here. If you want a insecticide prescription, liquid prescription, seeding prescription, all of those are each individually going to load and attach to each field. Okay, we can apply our attributes in there. If we're going multi-hybrid, we can do that. Field acres, if you want to type those in, you certainly can. It's not required for anything. I'll show you what we would use that for here in just a second. Scroll down, Stace.
One thing while we're on the prescription, we can only load one prescription in per field. So if we're doing seeding on one, liquid on another, has to be a secondary attribute within that file. We can't run separate files on that. Yes, sir.
While we're talking about adding fields real fast, climate says that if you want to make sure you get your imagery right in the season, that and if you're in a field where you're going to plant two parts of like one field, like a west half and an east half, cotton, corn, and you want to make sure the imagery comes out right, you need to do a temporary field, like one east or one west, and plant that, you know, as a new boundary, and then at the end of the season or after planting, merge that, or actually at the end of the season.
After harvest, so that,
after harvest,
okay.
sorry.
Okay.
So that you have the imagery show up correctly, because probably some of y'all have seen that where you get the bright green and all red and
Yep.
the halves or stuff like that, you don't see the differentiation in imagery and stuff.
Yep. Yeah, because it's comparing both halves, separate crops or separate planting dates or whatever, different growth stages. Yep, that's absolutely right.
Can you edit the boundary file names inside of the screen once they're loaded?
No, once they're loaded, so your naming's done by how we export it out, in your case, out of either Operations Center or Apex. When you do that export, that's the name that's going to show up in here unless you go through and rename it before we do that batch.
I can't remember how I did that, but the name that calls the file, it wasn't like your field name, it was some.
Yeah, it says boundary and then underscore and then.
Right, so when we did it for Greg here, we was able to specify it somewhere in there, and we'll have to go through and I'll get you the documentation of it specifying to verbalize the field name within the file name, so that when you're scrolling through it makes it easier to do that. It's still a pain and such, but we can.
Your boundaries in Op Center, you can go in and create a name.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
So name it
ki-
one boundary or
right, but to do the batch export, we're doing the entire farm as one export. That's where we got a little bit trickier. So I'll review that and we'll talk about it ahead or during lunch or something like that to be able to get more
You also
specific.
want to go in and, I found last year, go in and make sure that it's a good boundary.
Yes,
Because,
please.
you know, we had GS3s, it's early 2000s, so back then, you know, we weren't too worried about. So if one of those old boundaries got saved and it goes out there 30 feet or something,
And
that climate can bring that in, and I found that to be a couple of the cases. So I just went into Op Center and just deleted, cleaned up everything, deleted all that, and re-exported everything back in.
the other thing to remember on boundaries, the only time the 2020 technically needs it is if you're planting a field straight on a pivot. If you wrap the field first and then plant through it, we don't technically need a boundary because
Yeah,
we're going to swath against.
You're going around the outside edge, and you know your end passes. It will, if you're not right on top of it.
Yes, that is an assumption we are making in that statement. So depends upon the situation to determine how we want to dial that in.
See, where I'm at, we leave the boundaries off so you can steal that foot every single year, you know, from the neighboring field and keep increasing acreage.
My corn's so cheap because you guys grow 8 acres.
Yeah. Well, Nebraska, I think, is taking a few acres out of production right now. I'm pretty sure, but I'm not sure that's good for seed prices. All right, so let's go back. Scroll up to the very top, I'm sorry. The most important button when we're changing fields is this one right there. Otherwise, it won't change your field, okay? So you want to go in and hit Make Active. That's going to move me over to a new field. So go back to Home and then Setup. All right, so inside of the acres planted, you can get acres planted 72 of 0 if you put 0 in there, or if you put an actual measurement of acres in there, you'd get 72 of 140. However you guys want to do that is fine. So first thing, what am I? Second thing, where am I? Now what are we going to do? So I'm going to go into corn hybrid, left one over there. right there, I'm sorry. All right, touch hybrid A. And we're going to add a hybrid from the database. So in the software, the Ag Excel, I think is what they call it, or something like that, has like 75,000 hybrids and varieties preloaded in there. So somebody give me something you're going to plant here for a number. 1197. So most times the Pioneer number starts with a P, right? Okay. So you don't have to use the P, you don't have to use the dash, you don't have to use DKC, you don't have to use any of those. So if I just push in 1197, back up, just go 11 first. Okay, so there's too many in there, so hit the 9. As I start typing through, it's going to look for every different type of hybrid that's out there that have the first 119 in that order. Okay, and then if I put the 7 in behind that, then it's going to pull all of those. So you've got your AMX, you've got your AMs, whatever. You can look through all those different options. If you want to put in a custom hybrid, you just keep touching. So 1197, if we're going to put some awesome seed treatment in there, we call it awesome. So just type in the word awesome, and you would now have a custom hybrid that you can go in. So if you're trying different seed treatments, if you're doing starter, no starter, and you want to pull that through on a variety locator yield report or something like that, you can go in and just do custom naming on that if you'd like to use that as your trials. If I'm going to do this one with no downforce, or I'm going to run this one in a downforce trial, you can just name all your hybrids out based on whatever your given trial for that particular test is going to be. And then you would just hit your enter button or your check mark down in the corner. And then it wants to know, where am I putting this? Okay, so you're going to select which rows we're putting that on. We can put in our lot number, we can put our shape, we can put our seeds per pound, all of that information can come in. Hit enable, Stace. Okay, are we going with all rows, left rows, right rows, odds, evens? Is it a list? So go ahead and hit list. Let's put that on rows 1 through 4. So we're going to put a 4 variety plot in. Okay, now we go to hybrid B. Put 4620 for hybrid from the database. So this is a DeKalb number for our part of the world. So you can see there's the regular straight up 4620, then I've got rib corn in there. So again, I didn't have to do the dash, I didn't have to do DKC, it's just looking for 4620 in that order, and I can pull up a couple of the other ones. So pick one of those, Stace. Go ahead and hit enable again. Now let's do list again, and let's do 5, 6, 7, and 8, and then put 2 more in real quick. There you go. Yep. Put that on 9 through 12. Oh. All right, so perfectly. We've got that set up in there, and now I've got hybrid A, B, C, and D. So we can log 4 at a time across the planner, or you can just preload your 4 favorites, whichever you're going to run across the planner, and then the color code matches up with their assignment of where they're at on the planner. So we go out, we plant our pass, we've got our test plot in, we're just going to finish the field with 4620. If I just touch 4620, again select 4620 on the right, go to my enable, hit all rows. Now I've assigned that color across the planner, and you're ready to go across the rest of the field. Okay. When I'm ready to change crops, I'm going to switch over to something else. I go up to my active crop, touch where it says corn, and all of the ones that we have properly set up are in there for the active crop. So I hit soybeans, and it says remember, make sure that we're setting up our meters correctly. So one important thing that should be in there, if you hit back, Stace, if we go into our crops tab in here, so if we're going to plant milo or we're going to plant something else inside of here, we can go in and add our crops down below. So I go into add crop. Now here's all the different crops that we've got set up in the screen. So let's just say we're going to put sunflowers in down on the bottom. Okay, the most important thing to watch is if you're going to add this after the fact to get your seeds per disc right. There's a guy in South Dakota that called me one day exceptionally mad because he had just bought his brand new Roundup Ready 2 soybeans at however many too many dollars per bag, and he switched crops and went to soybeans, and he left his disc at 30 cell discs while he put the 108 cell disc in his planter. What do you suppose happened? The monitor says, I have 30 cells, I need 160,000, and so it spins it really, 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 really fast, and at about 60 yards, you're out of seed. Turns out they yielded okay, but we didn't know that in May, right? He was a little frustrated at that point. We all knew what the problem was, but obviously in your active crop setup, just double check that your settings are matching the physical disc that's in the planter so that we can get that correct.
And for reference, your corn is a 27 cell for all the V sets, and then your cotton, depending upon how old the meters are, is either going to be 27 if it's the old specialty crop, or if it's the new one, it's 32, or the kind of the primary ones to keep tabs on.
And you can singulate those now? I mean, they'll show up on the screen? Copy.
By half of last season, it was showing up, so I'm assuming it's going to run this year. We haven't actually been to the field yet to verify that.
So that's a good point. We talked about SRI a little while ago, trying to keep it below 15. Once SRI hits 25 or higher, it shuts singulation and spacing metrics off because it's essentially random at that point. So soybeans specifically will always kick out. Dry edibles at 90, 100,000 population, those are going to kick out. If we can physically read the seed and it's below that, so sometimes we struggle to read like sugar beet seed or canola seed, we'll struggle a little bit. I don't know specifically on the cotton
Looking
side
back,
of things.
second half cotton of this last season, typically sub 60,000, 5.5 mile an hour. SRI is running on 2022, so we can see it, but that was a smooth field. You get into some rough stuff, we're running that knife's edge. So if you don't see it, slow down, see if it comes up, and that's going to kind of tell you where you're at on that.
Let's go back to home. Go to setup. All right, so again, planter is set. I know where I'm going. I've got my hybrid set up. I can go in and make any liquid adjustments that I'm making if I'm, in this particular instance, I'm running starter. So now I go back to home. Now the only question I have left is how much, okay? I know where I'm at. I know what I am. I know what I'm supposed to be putting in the ground. How much of it would you like me to put out? And that's when we get into our control screens. Okay, so again, on the left-hand side, you guys can configure this however, meets your eye the way you want. We've got our big agronomic metrics over here, and now we've got to start telling the system to run and what we're going to do. So on V-Drive, we're going to go into that one first. Okay, we can preset all your population set points in here. So if I want to switch from 32 to 35, if I just click 35, you're going to be instantly at 35 or 28 or wherever you want to go. I can set this up so that I have the entire planter doing 35, or I can switch to multiple, and I can assign based on rows. If I want to do half the planter at 35 and I want to run half the planter at 25 and do a population check, I can do that. Always recommend doing different trials in your fields. Bump your population 2,000 for a pass and see what happens. Drop it 2,000 and see what happens. Put learning blocks in throughout the season. The best test plot is the one that's on your farm, and it's really, really easy to do that here. Okay.
One thing on this section, this comes back to the setup on V-Drive. Most of the time we're going to split that planter left-right. If we need to do something custom, call me and I'll walk you through how to tweak that if we need to get into more or higher resolution in regards to specific rows doing other populations.
Yep. We can split into 4 different sections on V-Drive. Sections have nothing to do with clutches. They have everything to do with, I want a certain section of the planter to run a certain population versus the next. If I'm running a prescription, every row is still going to change on its own. It's only on a manual assignment. I can switch between variable and manual rate, whichever way you want to go. We don't have a prescription set up for this given field, so we're all right. So I'm going to switch back to single. I am at 32,000, okay, and then I can just go back to home and I'm back on my main screen, okay. I also, depending on which way I have my screen set up, I have big boxes and I have small boxes. I can increase or decrease the rate by 500 by a quick touch on the screen. If I press and hold, if you have a smaller box like this, if I just press and hold on top of that, Stace, go ahead and click and hold, it'll pop up the bigger box and I can do plus minus on that if you'd like, so you don't have to have it taking up that real estate if you don't want to. The only time, that's more test plot work where you would want to do the split sections and do 32 and 30 over on this side or whatever. Some guys will run on a 24-row planter, the left CCS would be hybrid A, the right would be hybrid B, and they're running this one at 32 and this one's at 28 or something like that based on the hybrid loaded. The other time that would come in is in seed corn production where you got male and female rows and they're running at different populations. So again, you can configure those either way that you want them, either big box or small box. Questions on V-Drive? All right, now, V-Drive operates on two functions, okay? You have to tell it what it needs. So if you tell it a 0 rate, it won't plant, strangely enough. But it has to see speed and it has to have GPS to know from a swathing perspective where we're at, okay? I have never once, since 2013 when we started playing with V-Drives, I have never once adjusted the timing of them for swathing in and off, okay, or in and out. If my GPS is set correctly, I will never adjust a V-Drive. You may be different, this room may be different, but me personally has never touched them. If I can pass the GPS offset check. Okay, so let's go into our GPS offset check just while we're on the topic. I would assume you're doing this with everybody, but if we haven't, I'm going to show you something here. I highly, highly, highly recommend this test if you have your GPS provider come out and do a software update, rerun this check and verify. The absolute worst thing in the world is that one field by the highway always is the one with the skips that's 5 foot off, right? It's never the back 40 or anything like that. So inside of the GPS offset, what's going to happen, just to help you understand what's going on, I'm going to get on an AB line, and we have set up some measurements that says this GPS point is 209 inches in front of where my seed is dropping. Okay? We have gone through and put a number of manual measurements in for that. So I'm going to go out in the field, set up on an AB line, I set the planter down, and I put flags on either side of the gauge wheels, okay? Out on the ends, on the spindles of those. Okay? Doesn't matter where you make that mark at, you just need to make that mark on both sides of the planter. Then I'm going to hit continue. Okay, and what that continue does is it measures this point and says, okay, this point is 209 inches north of where my seed's at. Okay, Stace, go ahead and hit continue for me. We're going to turn around, and when we turn around, hit the button so it makes sure that it flips the heading on the GPS and confirms that we've actually turned the tractor around. Hit continue. And I'm going to go past, and now I'm facing south, and I'm 209 inches the other direction from where those flags are at, right? So let's say it's 210, it's easier math, okay? That means distance between here and when it was up here is 420 inches, right? Divide that in half, that's 210 inches if everything's right. So I hit continue, and it's going to measure out, and it's going to say, here's what we've got calculated based on GPS positioning. This is what you've got measured in. We've got a pretty big difference. You got a 14 feet difference? From what you have typed in versus what GPS, we're going to have 14-foot gaps in the field unless we fix something. Now, this particular one is we don't have any measurements in, right? And so we want to verify that the measurements left and right and forward and back match up. The difference number needs to be less than 5 inches. Troy's opinion, probably not this opinion. The closer to perfect, the better off we're going to be. But everybody that stops at the flag, one guy rolls forward and one guy rolls back, and it varies just a little bit. So I'll give you some leeway. If I can get these to match up, I have never touched a V-Drive. I've never turned swath changes or increased or decreased or monkeyed with any of that. I had a dealer 2 years ago that spent 13 hours monkeying with a guy's planter. Of course, it's a 90-foot planter. The guy should have planted like 4 quarters that day. He got like 80 acres done. He was thrilled. And what happened was they had GPS issues, and they used our little hockey puck to plug in because that one was going to work. That's a 1 hertz with basic accuracy of about here to the end of the Holiday Inn over there. And that's what they were controlling with, and they couldn't pass this test, and they spent all day monkeying with it. Well, they had bad GPS quality coming in. So again, if you have any software updates, any changes, there's a pretty significant GPS update coming. I think it's the 6th of April. There's frequencies and signal changes that are occurring. Some of the older stuff is falling off and non-compatible in Trimble and Deere systems. I don't know the specifics on it. If you have really old GPS stuff from 10 plus years ago, you might be affected. Check with your GPS guys. But again, just run this check. It's really super easy to do. It's just like doing a TCM calibration on a Deere auto steer. But we want to make sure that those match up. Okay?
You said you flagged the gauge wheel center points, not your center of your seat.
Yeah, it really doesn't matter where it's at.
It's a same point.
Yep, just make sure that both directions you're stopping at the same point. Yep, just one static known is all we need. Okay, any other questions on the GPS or V-Drive side of things? All right, so underneath your screen, you've got a switch box. Okay, we call it a cab control module. 5 switches on there. Right one is swath. If you want it to plant at all times while it's in the lowered position, flip that switch off. It'll plant anywhere you want. Okay, master switch on off. Okay, that's pretty self-explanatory on that one. Anybody in here have speed tubes? Go. Okay, one set of speed tubes. Speed tubes run anytime the tractor's running or anytime the power is on, so that if any seed gets dropped out of the meter accidentally or whatever, that it can clear itself. If you want them all to turn off, you just flip all 5 switches down. Okay. Same thing with the pump on a liquid system. Flip all the switches off and it'll kill the pump. Okay. When we're trying to load up, let's say we shut the vacuum off, shut the tractor off, had to reboot for whatever reason, you've got 3 boxes or 3 switches in the center. Okay. The outside 2 of the center 3 are called auto load switches. If you bump them, so they're momentary switches, if you just bump them up, it'll rotate all meters until it sees 3 seeds out of every single meter. Okay, then it shuts that row off until it gets all meters loaded. If you lift and hold on them, they'll run until you let go. Okay, so if you're just wanting to look at drops or whatever you want to do, you can do that. Okay, if you hold all 3 at the same time, nothing happens. Okay, so pretty simple there. One other thing I wanted to show you, I don't think it's a big deal down here, but I'm going to show you the function of it anyway, just in case it is. But I've got V-Drive Quick Start over on the side, and I typically set this up at a 5-second interval. Okay, what this means is I'm planting through the field, I got to the middle of the field, something happened, had to get out of the tractor, had to stop and get out. Okay, I'm stopped in the field, I've got seed where I stopped, right? But now I've got to get moving. And so what some guys will do is they'll lift up and they'll turn all the way around and drive around and they'll come back behind it and they'll take off and get going again. They'll put the planter in the ground early. Okay. What you can do with the V-Drive Quick Start is if I hit that button, what it'll do is it'll go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. And when it hits 0 is when I lift my foot off the clutch and start moving. When it hits 0, it starts turning the meters, whether you're moving or not. They'll run for 7 seconds or until they see speed. Okay, as soon as they see a speed source, whether that's radar or GPS come in, then they'll control based on the speed. But then I don't have any gap when I take off. Okay, otherwise I start moving and I've got to wait to see a speed, then I tell it a rate, and then I've got to drop seed this far. You're going to have 5, 6, 8 foot gap. If I hit this, I've got seed dropping before I ever get going. Me personally, again, Troy's opinion, I don't want any gaps. I don't want any weed flushes. I don't want anything like that. I don't care if I've got 10 seeds sitting on top of each other. I just want that spot filled in. I will hit that button when I'm sitting in the middle of a field and got to fix. It saves me from driving all the way back around and all that mess.
You don't back up again, you just stop from where you stop.
Correct. Yep. Yep. So if you want to adjust the timing on this one, Stacy, go to Setup. We're going to go to Systems. We're going to go into V-Drive, and then I'm going to go to Advanced. And that's where I can change my quick start delay in there. I like 5 seconds. Me, personally, I think 2 seconds is too fast. So I'll push the clutch in, I will hit quick start, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. When it hits 0 is when I start letting the clutch out so that it's actively rolling. If I go any time sooner than that, I'm still gonna have a gap. Okay, may not be.
So on the screen then, whenever your 5 seconds is up, does it count so you can watch it? Turn it on green so you know.
It's flashing,
Okay.
yeah.
Oh, and it just starts over if you don't go.
It'll shut them off and then you gotta re-hit the button. So yeah, the active is they're spinning, and then as soon as it sees speed from radar or GPS, then it goes back to normal control.
As soon as it says active, then you drop the clutch.
Yep. Yep. That's Troy's preference of how to do it. You guys use it how you want, but just know that that tool's available to you in there. Okay. Delta Force, Stace, go ahead and go into Delta Force. So we've gone through the process of what we're looking for on Downforce, right? Always have to turn it on for it to work, strangely enough. Okay, it's not connected on this demo, so it's not going to work. But I've got a target manual, do not react, or target automatic react. Okay, then I'm going to set either a light, heavy, custom, standard, whatever you want to set for your typical operation. Most guys will start in standard, set it in the ground, go out, they'll do their digging, do their assessment of their furrow, see what things look like. If I need more, They're going to hit the plus, bump it to 110, 120, 130. Again, everybody in here is a deer planter, correct? No cases in here? Okay. Case is a different story on this. They got to start much, much higher because of the way their gauge wheels are designed. Personally, if I'm planting through and I've got a big water hole coming in front of me that I know is a depression that's got just, it's going to be mucky when I get there, right before I get to it, I'll reach in and I'll hit light, and I just want to float across that ground. Don't push me down into the ground at all. Just get me into light, let me float across that, and that'll save me from some of the muck and some of the, balling up gauge wheels and all that kind of stuff. As soon as I come out of it, I'll go back into standard where I'm looking for weight on the gauge wheel. Okay. If I'm in a muddy parking lot and I step on a rut that's muddy, I'm going to squash it out, right? There's still no weight on the bottom of my boot. It's going to keep pushing, which is what Delta's going to do. If I'm in light, it's looking for less than 100% ground contact. It's just going to carry a light amount of weight across the ground. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. Standard on really wet, mucky ground is just going to keep pushing until it plows completely out. So I prefer in those spots just to hit light. Make sure you keep that screen up. When you get through the spot, switch it back to standard or your custom mode, whichever way you're running, and then you're good to go. Okay. Let's go back. I believe on this one, if you press and hold on the small one, it'll let you adjust that target as well. Okay, go into starter, Stacy. Go ahead and enable the product. Same thing as what we did with V-Drive. I've got preset numbers that are in here. I can fill and empty my tank so that I know where my tank levels are at. I can assign my rates identically to what I did with V-Drive. Pretty simple inside of that. Okay. If I want to adjust those liquid set points that are showing in those 8, you just go into your liquid set points and do that. Okay. Questions on the liquid stuff?
Can you name the starters, like 6.46?
Let's go to Home, go to Setup, go to Liquid, go to vApply HD, Application Nickname, let's go to Custom, type in 6-24-6. Enter, Home, and now you've got your name corrected.
It's got all the mixes in there too.
Yep.
How many to do.
So if I'm going to try a test of this and then I'm going to put a quart of zinc in with it, I'll do plus QT zinc or something like that, just so I've got my trial in there, and then as I'm trying to pull that information out, it's recorded separately. Rather than using flags and things like that, I would rather do it in product name. Again, my preference, not necessarily the only way to do it. Okay, any other questions on liquid, Delta, or V-Drive operations in what we're trying to do there before we get into Smart Firmer? Any other questions on anything else that we've talked about on the screen or how to operate any of that before we get to Smart Firmer? Okay. How many guys running a Smart Firmer in here? Bunch of you? Okay. Rule number 1, the lens has to be clean to get a reading. Okay. Pop-up will come up and tell you if it doesn't. You guys should all be getting updated tails on those so that they're the new strengthened tails. We actually backed up with them in a parking lot. And they didn't break, so that's a good start. I don't know if you guys had breakage problems down here, but we had a fair amount of that at home. So we've got those updated. They feel pretty good about them. They're not going to be invincible or anything like that. But 5 major metrics that come off of Smart Firmer, okay? We'll see if our orders match up. This will be interesting here, okay? I'll give you my order of importance. You give me your order of importance. I don't care about that number because I can't do anything about it. So that's number 5. That's the least that I'm interested in. I can't do anything about that one. That's number 4, but this one's important about germination, right? This one's easy to manipulate, so that's number 3. This one is number 2, and this one is number 1. However, number 1 and number 2 don't necessarily have the most easy to understand name. Does that match your list or is it different?
Uniform firm came first on one time swap.
Okay, we're close. Mine was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They're all important, okay? We're splitting hairs for the most part. All right. So what we're looking at here, organic matter's easy. You guys already understand that term, right? Okay, that's just a measurement of where we're at in the soil. So the way that's measured is reflectance of light. We've got about 400 to 450 different buckets of soil that guys have sent us in. We take a sample of that, we dry it down, we get the reflectance reading off of a smart firmer, we send that same sample to the lab, we get a lab analysis back, and we match those two up, okay? It is possible, 100% possible, that you will have a soil that does not match 100% to what our organic matter is. If it's different in your field, let's say you've got a 1%, a 3%, and a 5% in your fields, and it's reading 0.5, 2.5, and 4.5, okay? We might be a half low, but they'll all be a half low on that particular set of smart firmers, okay? We have a true up function. If you have a soil test that does not match what your smart firmer reads, we can true those up. We've got a tool that you can send that information in, and we can true up your maps for you. But generally speaking, that's pretty accurate between 1 and 7% organic matter. If you're in some of this really crazy peat that's off the charts high and you're in the black sands in Wisconsin, we might struggle with a couple of those on the far ends of the spectrum, but in the middle we're pretty darn accurate, and as we continue to build that library, we keep dialing it in. So if we don't match, send us a bucket of soil, we can get buckets for you, and we'll pay the shipping and everything to get those into our library and try to clean those up for you. So that one's pretty self-explanatory. Soil temp is pretty self-explanatory. I am not worried about what this is the day of planting. When does this number matter? 24 to 36 hours after you put that seed in the ground, the seed is going to try to take on its first drink of water, right? That first drink of water could be the absolute death nail or the start of something great, right? Okay, that's saturated cold germ. That's what we're trying to understand of how does a seed take on that first drink of water, and are the cells expanding or are they fracturing? Okay, anybody know who Ken Ferry is in here? Ken Ferry has a phenomenal YouTube video that's about 5 minutes long that talks about seed chilling and what saturated cold germ means and what actually happens to the seed if we have a seed chilling injury where we get a really cold rain right after planting, okay? But I do want to know this from a metric of, is my field ready to go? Because I take a meat thermometer and shove it in the ground in the spot that's going to give me the information I want to know, which says it's 49 degrees, which means 50 in my part of the world. You know, if it said 46, it means 50. You round up, right? But I'd like to know where this is at, and then I want to come back and do some stand establishment studies and understand, is soil temp driving emergence in my part of the world, okay? Probably not as big a deal down here as it is in the north, okay? So that's why those two, I can't do much about them, but I do want to know where they're at, okay? Clean furrow is, do I have any residue in that furrow? So trying to get foreign matter out. Now, there's two things that may happen. I may have a row cleaner adjustment that can clean that residue out of the way. That may be a difference in tillage next fall that changes the way that we get residue incorporated in our soils. We'll have to see what that means, but there's a very strong correlation between a low clean furrow and low yield, okay? It's going to depend in what part of the country we're in, but they're very closely tied, that as we have more furrow residue present, hairpinned residue, we will see loss in yield in those plants, okay? We'll get some more of that data put together, but it's looking pretty tight correlation on those. So then we get into moisture, okay? And these are a little bit hard to understand because they're not the most descriptive names as far as the way they go. So what uniform moisture or uniform furrow means is the vertical water table of your given field, okay? That is more of a yes-no question than it is a directive question, right? I either have enough moisture or I don't in the soil, okay? So the depth that I am planting says yes, 98.5% of the time your rows are in water. It's present. We're not talking about how much, it's just whether it's there or not, okay? What this means on a guy that doesn't do a block check underneath his gauge wheels prior to going to the field, and he's got the one row that's half an inch lighter, and he's got one row reading on uniform furrow that's at like 80% and the rest of the planter's at 98.5, we got a pretty good indication there's a mechanical problem on that row. Something is keeping that row from getting down into moisture, right? So we can use that as a diagnostic tool to find out, am I dropping seeds to moisture? So how deep are we planting here, this part of the world? About yay deep? If you guys, and this is crazy, I don't know how good of friends everybody is in this room, hold your first two digits next to each other. Did you know they're all the same length? Like they're really, really close to the same length. The answer shouldn't be 2. The answer is probably on average it's about 2 inches. We plant to moisture, not to depth. That's where we should be, is we should be planting to moisture. Oftentimes it's found at 2 inches, right? But depending on conditions and depending on whether we're irrigating and 100 other things, okay, we may or may not have the access to add more water, but we want to make sure at planting time that every single one of those rows is planting into water. That is what uniform furrow is telling me. 100% would be all rows over the last period of time have planted into moisture. 0% would mean no rows have planted to moisture. Anything in between is some rows have seen it, okay? 3 ways to put seed into dirt. All of them dry, all of them wet, some of them dry. We've got to get rid of the some, right? If they're all dry, none germ. If all of them are wet, they all germ. And if some are there, then we've got a problem, right? That gets me into the next category. Okay, so I'm trying to get away from the some. I'm trying to get uniform furrow as close to 100% as possible. Furrow moisture tells me how much moisture is available. Okay? A seed has to take on about 3 times its weight in water over a 3-day period in order to germinate. Okay? What furrow moisture is telling me is it present? I need it to be above 25, closer to 30 in order for that to take on. Okay? It's 30% of its weight in moisture, not 3 times its. How come you didn't correct me on that? It's my story, I'm sorry. So it's got to take on 30% of its weight in water, and that's what that measurement is, not 3 times. I'm sorry, I misspoke. So what we're looking for is above 25 to 30%, somewhere in that neighborhood will be the amount of water that seed needs to take on to fully germ, okay? If we fall below that number, that just means that the soil structure there does not have enough water present in order to have good, consistent germination. Pretty easy stuff there. So again, uniform furrow is your vertical profile of the water in the furrow. Okay, am I there or am I not? If I'm not, I need to look at my forecast and I need to think about irrigation. If it's 10 days before I'm getting rain and it takes 3 days to get that pivot around, we may have a consideration of going deeper. Now, the conversation here is, if I go deeper, does my ground crust? Now, if I'm running downforce, right, and I don't have the compaction and I don't have things in the environment that are going to crust that soil, I can probably go deeper. Our research would say in the last 2 years that an inch added depth without crusting, without the outside environment, if I go 2 inches in water and 3 inches in water, okay, there's about a 16-hour delay in emergence timing in an inch. It's not drastic. As long as that seed can still get its way out of the light, it'll take off and get caught up. But if I lay it in the ground at 2 and it doesn't have the moisture, it's not coming until we get some added moisture too. So we've got to look at weather. We've got to understand some of the other parameters that go into that, of whether I should go to 2 1/4 or 2 1/2. The guys in the sand hills in Nebraska, they'll plant 3 1/4, but they're in below sand. It's a different story out there. So we have those capabilities, and sometimes we're going to run into situations, where I don't have irrigation, we're all no-till. If that's bad, there's not much else I can do. I can go a little bit deeper, but we've got to be careful on our crusting where we're at.
And that furrow moisture is say you got 4 smart farmers. Can you look at individuals?
Yep.
Individual rows.
Yep. Stacy, go ahead and click right here.
3, you can see that row specific for what that was. Now, running the iPad and whatnot, you're going to be able to see all of that.
Our
Yes,
demos.
sir. So,
Our demo's not functioning correctly, but yeah, you'll be able to click on it, see the bar graph based, and then you can go to individual rows if you'd like. Yep. Now, I will show you one other thing, and I don't know how many guys are using that, but over here in OM control, I have to have.
Is there a warning on that soil moisture? Like if it gets below this, will it flash yellow or anything?
So let's go back to home, Stace. Go to setup. And then we're going to go into systems, I think. I'm wrong. Back up a screen. We got to go find our alerts. All right, go to display. Where's our alerts at? They moved them. Back up one, Stace. Go to crops. They moved this on us. Let's go to Smart Farmer Alerts right there. So here's all the parameters you can set up for your alerts and your alarms. So alerts are, hey, red, something, or is yellow, hey, something's not right, pay attention to me. And then alarm is red, hey, we've got to stop and do something differently. So you can set these up by crop. So Stace, go to crop, please. Okay, we can go to limit adjustments. That's going to be if I get outside of my population, higher or lower, where do you want me to scream at you? Where do you want me to just get your attention? Liquid alerts, same thing. Smart firmware alerts, let's go back in there. So you can change soil temp. We have not quite hooked up the stun gun in the seat to get your attention if the soil temp drops below 50, but it was a conversation at one point. Clean furrow, you can go 95 or 90%, and then furrow moisture, you can play with each of those. So we've got some pretty good data that when we fall below 25%, that there's going to be a significant loss in emergence timing. Again, if it rains tomorrow, it's probably going to get caught up and you're not going to see a lot of it. But if it's 5-6 days before we see that next spring rain rolling through, we may see some issues there. So what has driven a lot of this is we go out and we sell a downforce system, we start doing stand establishment back behind a delta, and we go, man, they're all at the same depth, what's going on? That one's behind, that one's behind, that one's behind, those are all good, what's the difference? They're all at the same depth. After it's rained, you can't see the difference, right? You have to catch and you have to assess that before that initial rain comes in, that we've got some in moisture and some not.
How often are those taking readings?
What are they, 4,000 times a second, 2,000 times a second, somewhere in there. So it depends on the angle. In that case, at 5 miles an hour, a fifth of a second is roughly 16 to 18 inches, something like that. If that angle is out like this, I'm going to catch it going through. If the angle is directly perpendicular, I'd probably miss it from time to time on the map. I'd probably get some of it, but not every single instance of it. It doesn't smooth it much. You'd probably catch it on the map and you'd probably catch it in the numbers, but we're not going to hyper change it. We'll smooth that out to, I believe, a 1 second. I'd have to double check that. I think it smooths to a 1 second. If the variance occurs in a spot bigger than that at 5 miles an hour, I'll get it. We'll see it on the map. It's that, like delta force, same thing. Delta force is going to true up every fifth of a second. If I take a 3/4 ton pickup and drive perpendicular to me, I'm going to miss the tire track. I'll report it and I'll correct. If I take a Terrigator with a big floater tire on it, I will react in the tire track. You know, I'll have it trued up inside of that. It's just hard to comprehend all of that stuff happening that fast, so I have to boil it down to inches and feet. So every 200 times a second is about 7/16 of an inch on the ground. That's a load cell reading. Smart firmers are reading either 2,000 or 4,000 times a second. So it's pretty intense data that's coming in. We've got to get it into a usable format. There is a way in the background of the system to high-speed log that. If we get into some of these really way out there in left field things where we've got to do some analytics, so we talked about the load cells. We had to record those at 200 times a second to figure out what was causing those issues. If we ever have to go to that level, our engineers like to geek out on stuff like that, and we can log it and figure out what's going on. It just fries memory in a hurry, so we do it for very short periods of time, and we can get that stuff out. Let's go back to home. So we've got the alarms figured out. Any questions on the 5 metrics off of Smart Firmer? Clear as mud on those. All right, let's go back into OM control over here. If I have a Smart Firmer every 4 rows or tighter resolution, so 1 every 3 or 1 every 2 rows, if you would like, you can go in and do a population control based on organic matter. You can go out and say, I've got a range in my field from 6 to 1.5. If I find a spot below 1.5, I can go in and assign a population. So go ahead and hit that 32 Stace on the top. Let's change that to 25. So when I get into my poorer soils, my low OM, whoops, sorry. There you go. So we're going to have our midline in here. Our default rate of our V drive is at 32,000. So I want to back it off 5,000 when I get into my poorer soils. Let's back it off 2,500 when we get into the middle. So this is on my lower end, but not the bad stuff. And then I can go here and go positive 2,500. So I'm going to bump my rate just a little bit. And when I get here, we're going to go for all of it. And I'm going to go after another 5,000 plants per acre. I can do the same thing on my liquid if I'd like. If I don't want to put anything in on my low, or I don't want to put anything on my highs, whatever you want to do, if you would like to do this, you certainly can. Okay, it's not required. In order to do it, all you have to do is turn it on there. There's no unlock, there's no extra fees or anything like that. The only requirement is this has to be controlled by V-Drive, this has to be controlled by V-Apply. Okay, that's the only requirement that's there. There's no unlocks or software. It's all flip the switch and you can try it for a pass and shut it off for a pass, whatever you want to do. Okay. Questions on that?
Might apply to a prescription, say another prescription too, it'll just, what the base rate is if we do some increases.
Correct. Take your prescription and then flip the prescription off and do a pass based on OM control and watch the two of them line up. One of my guys in North Dakota did that, and it was like they traced the same lines. I mean, it finished it off. It was really, really cool. Let's go to home.
How did they write their original prescription based off the
They had a number of different layers. I believe yield, they went off of satellite data, and they went off of soil tests, I believe. I think. I might be making that up. Let's go to setup. If you ever have a problem, again, green is good, yellow is caution, red is a problem. Anytime you have a problem, we go to diagnose page, and our diagnose page tells us if anything is right, wrong, or otherwise. You want this entire page to be green. If you ever get lost on it, you can hit color legend. And it says green, everything is here, it's functioning, everything is normal. Yellow is something's not right, but we're still functioning. Red is something was here and it's not anymore and it's not functioning, you should probably fix it. White is I have no idea what you just plugged in, but there's something here that I don't recognize. That's usually a setup issue. Black is something that is present, functional, but has been turned off somewhere in our configuration. And gray is something that's not ready to go. So if I come in here and I look at all my number of rows of my planner across here, it says I have issues all the way across row 1 to 16. Those issues reside in my smart firmer, my auxiliary sensors, my SRMs, and my V-applies. We got a wreck on this planner right now. Okay. The good news is the monitor's good, right? The box on the floor, that's the only thing operating correctly. So if I touch on V-apply HD on the left-hand side, it will take me in and I can see actual and commanded gallons per acre. I can see where my ball valve position is at. I know my flow meters and what they're telling me. A lot of this information is probably more than you want to know, but it makes him answer the phone and fix your problem light speed faster by having this information right there. He can go in, it comes through and it says command ball position. Well, it says 25, 25. His immediate response is your module is starving. We're not getting liquid to the row. Okay, we know right now where my problem is. It's not at the row. It's not a control problem. Something is not allowing liquid to get there. Okay. If I back up one Stace and we go to the SRM, I can look at voltage draw on each one of the rows. I can look for CAN errors. I can look at all of my data coming in. I don't need voltmeters. I don't need you guys to get out of the cab. I don't need anything at all. We can fix you most of the time over the phone by getting good data back. Okay. Any questions on our diagnose page or anything you need to know there? I don't expect you to know much, just know that it's there. Okay. A lot of times you can kind of fix your own problems just knowing that that function is available to you.
Go back to the diagnose screen.
So this one is saying you have a system-wide problem on all rows. If this was a functional system, row 4 goes red, V-apply goes red. You know that row 4's V-apply has something going on. Likely got unplugged or its wire got clipped or something like that. Okay. All right. So the only other thing, go back a screen if you would, Stace. Go back. One more. There we go. Data down here on the bottom. This is where we're going to do our software updates, importing and exporting and deleting of data, and backup and restore. One thing I would ask you to do is when we get to the field and everything is functional and you've got your planner set the way you want it, go to backup and restore and go to backup all. Okay, we're going to put a USB in there. It will remember your settings, it'll remember your coverage, it remembers everything up to that point and saves it. If the planner and tractor were to burn to the ground, you could load that thing back up and you'd be right back to where you were when you hit that backup. So just to know your configurations, prescriptions, field names, all your control settings, all that kind of stuff is all backed up when you hit backup all. Okay. Delete button when your hard drive gets full, which is going to be a long time from now based on the hard drive size on these. You can delete field map data, prescriptions from year to year, or all data if you'd like to nuke the system. Import, we have crop configs, swath coverage, pretty easy there. And then export up on top, if you'd like to export some data out, you certainly can that way. Okay, one last little thing. There is an app now that is on your phone. If you go to the App Store or the Google Play Store, whichever way. Stace, can you go? Yeah, we could do it that way. So I'll just hold this up. You guys won't be able to see it very well. But we put a new function in here with the latest software update. And we can go to, if I hit the right button sequence here. I'd quit touching buttons. We have what we call 2020 Connect. And so you can have an app on your phone. It brings up a QR code. So I just take the app, 2020 Connect, and I hold it up to that, and it will pair to the monitor. And now I can take this and go stand on the back of the planter, and I can look at all my diagnose screens. I can run my meters. I can do a lot of my health checks standing at the back of the planter, not sitting in the cab. Okay, so know that that's there. That literally came out last week. There's a ton of functions coming for that. So if there's specific requests you have, 2020 Connect. Yeah. So what that looks like on my phone, I know you guys can't see this very well right now. I've got the same exact, if you go to the diagnose screen, Stace, I'm showing smart firmer in the rows that are an issue, SRM. I'm showing the SRM is red. Everything that you're seeing on that diagnose screen, I've got on my phone right now. Okay, I can go back and I can look at system commands. I can look at, so if I go to meter load, I can hold those switches up and make the meters turn. I can do some setups and diagnostics. I can do some GPS health checks. So the really nice thing when you got a four-wheel drive tractor and you're about tired of being up and down the ladder a couple times, you can actually just do your measurements and type them in on the phone and they'll transfer to the display and life's easy. So just know that that function's there. If you have specific requests of things you'd like to do that are not here, feel free to feed those back to us. It's brand new and we control the software for it. So makes it kind of nice that we can do some development work if we need. So if you'd like to look at that or if you'd like to pair up to this one to try it on your phone and see how it works, we can do that over lunch. I believe when your phone sleeps, I think it disconnects and you got to reconnect it. We've covered a lot. I don't expect you to remember everything. I think a lot of this will jog your memory when you get to the field and you get to running. I do have one very, very heavy request of you guys. Do not sit in the field and struggle. There are no stupid questions. The stupid question is the guy that sits for 6 hours struggling on a problem that he could have solved for 10 minutes on a phone, right? Feel free to call Hans. He's got his support staff. If they're tied up, we've got free support staff you can get a hold of. We've got cloud troubleshooting documents on our cloud at cloud.precisionplanning.com that are open to all users. You can download your own software there. All of our troubleshooting trees, all of our owner's documents. We've got product videos on there. If you want to review a lot of the stuff that we've talked about, all of that's open to you guys on the cloud. You don't have to have a login or anything to get into it. But please don't sit and struggle. That's the worst phone call in the world, is to give you a 30-second answer that fixes your problem that you've been down half a day for. So.
And that's something that I think you mentioned earlier is if someone did your custom screens, like if you wanted to set up your custom layouts, there's 8 or 9 videos on the cloud that Troy's referencing, like 2 or 3 minute videos. So when you actually get in the cab, if you need a refresher on, hey, how do I set up my custom layout? You go to the cloud.precisionplanning.com, watch some of those videos. I mean, they're short, but they're informational. They'll help you set it up a lot quicker.
Yeah, they've done a tremendous amount of video work, and they're all just short little snippets of here's the screen press and here's how to walk through it, just reviewing a lot of what we did. Nothing that we've talked about here is not in an owner's manual, so if you want, I know nobody reads owner's manuals ever, right? But if you wanted to review it, it's in there. But any questions about anything that we've covered or anything we haven't covered?
Can you touch on downforce margin just real quick?
Mm-hmm. Downforce margin as a general non-engineering term is the amount of weight. So pull that plus minus screen back up if you would, please, on your PowerPoint. As a general, without getting into the weeds of engineering, engineers would kill me for this, okay? Because it's a way more technical answer. When this exceeds this and there's weight in excess here, that is margin. Margin is the amount of weight that is above and beyond hitting ground contact that is sitting right here. Now, the way margin is displayed on a screen depends on whether you're a spring system, an airbag system, or a Deltaforce system. There's a lot of weeds to get into that means nothing to anybody in this room other than about 4 engineers at Precision. But ideally, we would like to run a low margin, but margin doesn't exist in Deltaforce. Okay? So I've pretty much just lost the room, I'm sure. But margin is not even in the calculation. The reason it's called Deltaforce is it is the delta difference between the lowest reading over the last 1/5 of a second and where our control is at. It's collapsing that difference in there. So it's actually delta meaning change. The mathematical delta is why it's called Deltaforce. So what it's looking for is when you set your 100 or 110, it's looking for 100 pounds here. That is not necessarily 100 pounds of margin, but that's what the weight that we're setting for. Firming force will be the word that I use rather than margin. I've got to establish that V, and so I'm going to either increase or decrease the amount of weight in my control to set my V where I want it, and then as my field conditions change, my speed changes, any of these other variables change, delta compensates for those changes. Does that make sense?
So ignore it on the screen.
Pretty much. Yep. The number that I would look at, there is an average number and a margin number. The tighter you get average and margin, the healthier your system is. The smoother your fields are, the more consistent your fields are. If average is one number and margin is a whole different number, your margin should match what your command is, your 100. If those two are widely spread apart, we have huge variation across the planner, and we're fighting like crazy to keep up with it. So we'd like to get those two numbers as close as possible together. Other questions on what we've covered or have not covered?
Where you've used the VFI so far on our strip till, when you made the outside pass around the field, and then he hits that pass and the road starts shutting off, what's the time limit when they kick back on? Because what he noticed was if he didn't get that hitch up, the roads kicked back on, unless he made 2 passes.
For a V-drive or a V-apply or a delta to work, system has to be in a lowered state, so that's a lift switch, work switch. Okay, it has to be in an uncovered area, so an unplanted or unsprayed applied area. It has to see speed, and on the planting stuff, it also has to see seed being present. Okay, so it has to be actively trying to plant. Side dress is slightly different. It doesn't need to see seed in that situation. But for delta to work, it has to see seed. For V-drive, it has to have seed, speed, lift switch, and obviously electricity. Okay, if it has all of those and you're in an uncovered area, it's going to plant because it doesn't know any different. Okay. So I was applying 19 gallons when it went out, keep applying 19, or go to my default that was set as 25 if that was my default. I can go either way with that.